Okay, let's pray. Father, we thank you this morning that you are the rock who is in control of all things. We thank you that you are shaken by no circumstances about us, that from the beginning of time, from the beginning of eternity, you are and have been and always will be the creator of all, the king of the universe. You control all things, you know all things. Nothing is new and nothing is a shock to you. We thank you that today, as we meet together, you are directing in all of our circumstances. And one of those circumstances is the blessing and the privilege of being together. We thank you that we can be together today and study your word. We thank you that that is another testimony of how you're guiding and how you're helping, and that you've made this possible. I thank you for each person who has the heart, the willingness, and the desire to study your word together. Thank you for the expression of that and their willingness to come, to tune in, to give their morning. And I do pray, just like Revelation says, blessed is the one who reads, blessed are those who hear and who do all the words of this prophecy. I pray specifically that each one of us would be truly blessed this morning by hearing your words, loving your words, and responding to your words. Help us to be in awe at the richness of the things we discuss today. Help us to be amazed and to love the truths that we will see, because they are beautiful, because Jesus Christ is beautiful, because your word is beautiful, because it defines life, a reality greater than any other reality we see on planet Earth. So we ask and beg your help, that in all of this you would aid and help us. We ask this in your son's name. Amen. So I've got a different background, different surroundings here today, just because we had a little bit of change on our end of things here in Manila. So you may have heard or may not, but 2 days ago, I think that's right, Thursday night, the President Duterte, just announced a lockdown in Manila. It's actually not in force yet. It'll come into force tomorrow or midnight tomorrow. But that just means that everything's shut down, and that includes BJNBC. So we've moved everything into the online space. For those of you who are already watching online, it makes no difference. You just continue doing what you were already doing. So no particular change for you. But for others of us, we're not able to meet physically together. So, okay, here we are. This works. And it's a way that we still can communicate with one another. If you have any questions, any problems, some of you may be just getting used to this format. It's a different way to do it. Totally understood. So just let me know if you have a question or a problem like that. Let's start out with this, just so you know. Just take a look down. It should be at the bottom of your screen. Sometimes depending on the device, the layout's a little different. But I think at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see a button that says chat. And so just so you know, if this is a new platform to you, you can just drop a message in there anytime. Here, I'll say hello to you. Anytime you drop a message in there, question, feedback, and I will ask for feedback later on, specific things that I want to get your input on later on. Okay, so those are options there. And this way we're able to quickly, easily communicate with one another. One other thing is, just as we're getting started here, I hope that your time spent on the project made sense to you. And if it didn't, again, please let me know. I'm glad to know how to make or how to explain anything like that, if you'd like further explanation. So these projects, I wish I could do more. I think it would be enjoyable. I think you would enjoy some of the other projects that we could do, but obviously there's limitations on time. These projects, then, I really am hoping, I want them to be devotional for you. So last week you did this project working on the angels, and then this, or demonic activity is what we called it. And then this week I was asking you to spend some time working on the image of God, specifically looking through these 3 sets of passages, and then giving me a 1-page summary of the concepts in these. Again, I believe this deeply. These kinds of concepts are potentially really beautiful concepts that can be devotional and that can be rich for our understanding. So there's some things to work on there. Okay, give me a quick second. I'm just going to speak with someone here for just a moment. Give me maybe 2 seconds, and I'll be right back. Okay, so we had this project.
Can I wear my mask? Is it okay?
We had this project that you guys were able to work on. I hope, again, that was a devotional process. That's kind of the format we'll follow for today. So we will be working through, what does it mean already we've done this? What does it mean that man is made as in God's image? Or kind of what is the definition of the image? And then from there, what I want to go in the direction is, who is the image of God? And how does this reshape our theology of sanctification? Let me ask you, let me see in your chat, let's talk about that second question. What stuck out to you there, or what did you come to with that? Any feedback there as far as the second question went? Who is the image of God? What does that mean? I'm looking at this question right here, highlighted for you. But give me some feedback there. I'm kind of looking for a specific passage or some passages that communicated this idea for you. Any thoughts there? Up.
Hebrews 1:3.
Great, excellent. So a comment here, Hebrews 1:3, that he is the image of the invisible God. Okay. You've got a couple of others, actually. If you look at it up here, that's what these, excuse me, that didn't quite work. That's what these passages are doing. 2 Corinthians 4:4, Colossians 1:5, 15, Hebrews 1:3. Each of them together are going to take us in a direction that we're going to look at. And what we're going to end up with here, I hope you've already come across, is the realization that Jesus is the image of God. Or if we were doing Tagalog, like parang yung tanging image, yung tanging arawan. I mean, he is the unique image of God, okay? But that's discussion for a little bit later. So here's what I would like us to do for now. I want to recover a little bit of, I'm not going to do a full review here, but cover a little bit of understanding, just making sure we're clear on what is the image of God in the first place. As in, if we talk about the image of God, what does that mean? What do we mean by that? So I'm in Genesis 1:26 again, what we looked at before, just to get these ideas back into our heads so we're on track. The kind of core statement, the fundamental first and important statement, where God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Okay, we have image, we have likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the cattle, over all the earth, every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And we have, like, what, 4 times in there the words image or likeness, I guess 3. No, 4. 4 times image or likeness is coming up in the passage. But then what we discovered last week, our conclusion was, at the center of that was this statement, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea. Kind of a headship. Human beings stand out. Human beings are different than the rest of creation. And actually, there are a lot of implications of that. So some things that we talked about last week and some things we did not talk about. The practical implications of the image of God. We protect human life in all of its forms. And human life in all of its forms equally, which means we are opposed to abortion. Just because it's little doesn't mean it isn't human life. We're opposed to euthanasia. Just because it's abnormal, deformed, doesn't mean it's not human life. Just because this person doesn't fit the center group of what we think are the majority. We don't try to trim out the margins. And if you go back there, it's a very, very fascinating period of history. We all know the Nazi story, right? And so the concept underneath that goes, though, that their Aryan race is superior. And so the Aryan Germanic people are superior, more intelligent, more whatever. And so you're going to try to wipe out all the other groups so that this race can go forward and be, well, believe it or not, that was not just a German thing. I mean, there was an American Society of Eugenics. There was a worldwide movement in this direction. And the reason for it is at the time, it's a very logical implication of evolution. A very logical implication of evolution is the way we've gotten to where we're at as a species is by killing the weaker and by the stronger and the smarter being able to breed and pass on their genes. And so how then will we continue to see the evolution of the human race? How will we get better? Why try to wipe out the weak ones and let the strong breed? I mean, it's an implication. And I know that a dedicated evolutionist would have, there are answers that can be made to this, but actually it's quite logical, okay? Christianity and the doctrine of the image of God rejects all of that on good grounds, on good basis, because it's just broken. All right, so we oppose, or we support and protect human life in all of its forms. Same things with eugenics, with euthanasia on the older side of things. In other words, what's going to happen here eventually? Lifespans have extended out. There's a bit of pressure on this front already, but the question will become, well, if so-and-so, if grandpa is no longer contributing, then is that really, we need to keep him here? I'm not completely dystopian on that. I'm not completely under the assumption that everything's going to go that direction, but there is already some pressure here. If I'm in pain and if I don't enjoy my life, then do I have the right to end it? Those kinds of questions. And we would be opposed. There's some ethical complexity in some of those discussions, but we would be opposed to somebody saying, well, you feel hopeless about your life, we'll go ahead and let you end it. As a society, we'll provide you a way to quietly end your life. We support and protect human life in all of its forms because human life is precious, and it's precious because people are made in God's image. Right? A second implication, practical implication of this is just very obvious, and every society I've ever known personally maintains this distinction, though in the past there have been societies that don't. We recognize there's a fundamental difference between killing an animal and killing a person, right? Okay. Now, that has more significant implications for us with things like, how about environmentalism? How do we view a Christian role in environmentalism? And an answer gets interesting and it gets complicated, because if the image of God is involved with subdue the earth and have dominion over it, I do think there's an implication in here. Don't turn the place into a trash dump. And one of the reasons I don't want to turn the place into a trash dump, one of them is because God made us in his image. Why should we make this a miserable place to live for future generations of humans? Humans are precious. Okay, so if you've got these natural parks that are just beautiful, why trash those places up? God made them beautiful. Let's let other humans enjoy them. Okay, so a concept like that, that's a legitimate, valid concept in there. At the same time, the thing that's so interesting about environmentalism is that it can form into kind of a substitute religion almost, where because people no longer have a place for God in their world, then what they end up with is kind of a substitute religion. I talk about Mother Earth. I talk about protecting her, and this becomes like the mission of my life. And even to the extent, if you listen to strong extreme environmentalism, their solution here is we will never make the environment right until we can eliminate some people. Until we can eliminate some humans, the environment will never be correct. And that, again, is an utterly broken notion, because at the core, at the foundation, God made this world and he put us in it, and we have an important place in it. We are not just a problem for the environment. We are a beautiful part of God's creation. Okay. In fact, we are the most important part of God's creation. We are made in God's image. Okay. So it helps. I think it's a beautiful concept because it helps us maintain both sides of attention with environmentalism. I'm not against environmentalism. Let's take care of the world. Let's not turn it into a trash dump. But at the same time, there is a core place for humans. Okay, and then maybe I'll do one more concept that's a practical implication of the image of God. We recognize the dignity of all humans. Men, women, children, the handicapped, people with disabilities, every race, every group of people, whether we say they are a sophisticated, developed culture, or whether they are a less sophisticated, less developed culture. I don't even like that. Oops. But however we want to refer to it, if this is a culture with technology or not, that every culture, every group, so let's go deeper, every human has dignity because every human has the image of God. And so we don't look at like one group of people that has more money or more technology in their pockets and view them as more significant, because they aren't. What defines significance is the image of God. And that's the way we start with the whole discussion of significance. Okay, sorry about the delay there. I'm very grateful I have 4 friends here. I thought I was going to be all lonely today. So I have 4 people that are here. So actually in a little bit in the break, we'll move downstairs. But for now, we'll just keep on rolling here. Okay, now all of that was an attempt to kind of recover the idea. So if I say to you, how about let's do this in the chat. If I say to you, what is the image of God? Give me a shot. How would you define the image of God? And let's see if, I'd love to see if I can hear from everybody, if you're willing. Don't sit there and think, okay, I'll just let somebody else answer. Really, let's get an answer from everyone. What is the image of God? What does that mean? I've been talking about the image of God, but now I want to know, what does the image of God mean? What are we going to put in here? All right? Take a moment. I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes. Let's see if we can get something written down, and then we can share it between. If you're embarrassed, send it as a private message. You can do that. If you switch to and you just say to me, then it'll only come to me. But why be embarrassed? You know, show this to everybody. So, okay, take about 2 minutes. Concept, Sin in the Fall broke the goodness that God created. A connecting concept here goes, since it's creational, it's still in us, and you can't make it go away. Which is the irony that an unbeliever or people who deny God, they end up denying that they are also made in the image of God. And so they're going to rebel against God, they're going to mock God, they're going to deny his nature, but at the same time, they can't get away from who they are. They are still made in the image of God. And the irony then becomes that it will leak out sometimes. It will leak out sometimes when they say things they don't mean to say, like assuming that there is a right and a wrong, assuming that there is inherent good in loving other human beings, or even things like creating and working, and they'll say things like, we want to make a better world. And one of the questions goes, why? Why should you care? Because technically speaking, evolutionarily speaking, you should just care about number one. You should just care about yourself. So why care about making a better world? I would posit because God put into human nature the desire to subdue the earth and have dominion. And so even though they reject God and they hate and mock his word, they're actually doing it. They can't not subdue the earth and have dominion. They will still try to. They will still try to. It's in their nature. They can't escape it. Okay, so it really gives you, to me, it gives me a powerful grid for understanding human behavior. What's going on here? And the answer is they're still carrying out the image of God. Even after the fall, God engineered his image so deeply into them. It's still there. They can't make it go away. Okay, so great. All of this, what you guys said, basically, what I'm going to do, I'll try to pull together what you said into 2 concepts. And the 2 concepts would go, number 1, the basic, I think, and this was the majority of what you guys wrote, and really clearly and well, is an idea that here is God's nature. Who is he? Okay. God's nature, and then what we're saying is in some kind of, outline sort of way, some aspects of man's nature, in some outline way, they mirror God's nature. Okay, so there's things about man's nature that remind us, when we look at man's nature, remind us a little bit of God's nature. Okay? And putting those 2 together, then you say there's an image or there's a likeness. It's kind of like if I have a photograph of my wife that's not my wife, but it definitely tells you what my wife is like, or at least tells you some of what she's like. Not everything, but some. Okay. So we kind of have this outline-ish mirror sort of way, in a way, that you can see a little bit about who God is. Okay. So that's one concept. But then the second concept that I want to put in there right together with that, it's not just generally the question of man in some way mirroring God's nature, but it's mirroring it in one specific form or one specific way. And that specific way is having dominion. Or maybe a better way to, well, I don't want to say a better way because it's biblical language, isn't it? So it's not, there's no better way. But let's say a notion like us taking care of the earth, us overseeing God's garden, God's creation. Okay, again, when I say taking care of the earth, your mind goes, environmentalism. No, I don't just mean environmentalism. Taking care of God's creation. God gave us a place in this world, a role in this world, where we are supposed to oversee what he made. And that includes taking care of one another. Okay, subdue the earth, have dominion, fill the earth. We're supposed to take care of one another. That's why in our nature, we all understand, this is a funny way to say it. A couple of weeks ago, I came outside here at BJMBC, and the lady who does a lot of cooking for us was out there, and she was chopping fish. Okay, just chopping these fish into pieces. And at some point, she accidentally hit her finger, and her finger started to bleed. And so everything shut down. Me and another of the guys, we were over there, we're helping her, we're getting bandages, and we spent like 10 or 15 minutes trying to make sure that her finger was okay. The good news is it was, and it healed. There's hardly even a scar. But it's kind of interesting to think she's sitting there chopping fish, just hacking fish into pieces. But as soon as she gets a little piece of her finger, everything stops. Why? Because the human is different than the fish. We all know this. You can chop fish to pieces all day. Nobody cares. Get a little piece of your finger, big deal. Okay. We care about the human. We don't care about the fish, except unless they're delicious. So we like to eat them. That's it. Okay. But that's telling you something. And we're trying to take care of each other. So my friend and I are over there helping her find bandages and all that because it's in my nature, not just be like, whatever, human. I don't just go, whatever, human. Human! See, we care about each other. Okay. That's, again, an expression of the image of God that's built into us and we can't get away from it. All right. Now, that was one set of ideas. But then what I'm hoping this is already like, well, yeah, because you did the project. So it's Al-Khaynaman if you weren't able to get to it yet. But this idea then, now let's build this out a little bit. And let's do this by going, we'll do this. We'll start by going to Psalm 8, okay, which we've already looked at, haven't we? Let's go back to Psalm 8. We already established, I think, that this passage is a clear image of God passage. We already established that some of this is going on. So we talked about like verse 3, when I consider the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have ordained, what is man, that thou art mindful of him, the son of man, that thou visitest him. But you have made him a little lower than the angels. So, man is so small. Why does man matter? Well, actually he does, because even though he's a little lower than the angels, you have crowned him with glory and honor. And you've made him to have dominion over the works of your hands, and thou hast put all things under his feet. So it sounds like Genesis 1. And then now we actually have echoes of Genesis: sheep, oxen, beasts of the field, fowl of the air, fish of the sea, whatever passes through the paths of the sea. So all of this language really strongly echoing Genesis and specifically connected into the image of God concept. All right. Now, here's where this gets interesting, though. Let's go from Psalm 8, and let's jump to Hebrews. And we're going to pick up in Hebrews a quotation of this. So he's comparing angels and man. In Hebrews 2, verse 5, he says, unto the angels hath he not put in subjection the world to come. He has not put in subjection the world to come, because one in a certain place testified, saying, what is man that thou art mindful of him, or the son of man that thou visitest him? Thou madest him a little lower than the angels. Thou crownest him with glory and honor, and didst set him over the works of thy hands. thou hast put all things in subjection under his feet. And it's not hard. I mean, that's why I'm glad we've spent a decent amount of time in Psalm 8. It's not hard to recognize that this section right here is all just straight up a quotation of Psalm 8. It's straight out of Psalm 8. Okay. So easy enough. He's just quoting Psalm 8. Now watch what's going to happen though. Because in this, he's referring to man or the Son of Man, right? And he's going to refer to a hem. And a hem is here, and thou hast put all things in subjection under his feet. So you've got a hem and a his, and a man and a son of man language. But now watch what the author of Hebrews is going to do, verse 8. But now we see not yet all things put under him. Who's the him? And the answer is, if you look around you and you think something like, okay, mankind is supposed to have dominion, and so all things under his feet, or this kind of thing. Look at the world and see how it's going. And clearly, we have not yet accomplished the purpose of having dominion and taking care of God's garden, if we say it like that. I mean, that's the way we think dominion. I said yes last week. Don't think you need to go out and find the nearest animal and wrestle it to the ground. How's that going to help anything? The concept of dominion is take care of God's garden. Okay. Well, if you just ask yourself now, how well are we doing taking care of God's garden? You start to see immediately that we are extraordinarily weak in our ability. We're extraordinarily resourceful, and we do incredible things. You are, after all, listening to a class taught by somebody hundreds of miles away in many cases. Okay? Some of you are in Singapore. Others of you are across town. But anyway, you're sitting here, after all, listening to me, hearing my voice, seeing my face, I'm really sorry, even though you're on the other side of town. Okay, that's incredible. That's awesome. And yet, if you just think pause for a second, why are you hearing my voice? And why are you watching through the video? And the answer is because it's for many of you. Some of you, because you're in Singapore. Others of you, because we have this sickness and we can't control it and we don't know what to do. And so we're all spread out so that, see? Okay. So in a way, we have dominion, but in another way, this world is incredibly out of our control. In a way, we're very effective in our ability to do things on planet Earth. In another way, we are constantly reminded that we're incredibly limited in what we can do. And even in the case of, those of you in Singapore, it's a limitation of distance. So it's not connected to the sickness, but it's a limitation of distance, which is another expression. As humans, we have limits. There's only so much we can do. So the concept we see now that all things are not yet put under him, verse 8, is to say the job is not yet done. The world is still a mess. We're still under the curse. Every time a person dies, it's a reminder that even though that person is precious and made in the image of God, we had our limits. And a precious image bearer died, and now that body is going to be laid in the dirt, and they're gone. And that's really sad. That was the precious image of God. That was an image bearer. We cared about them. Now they're gone. Okay. So the curse is still here. And that takes us now, notice I underlined, I won't do it again, but I underlined all the he, hims in here, right? Thou made him a little lower, thou crownest him with glory and honor. That sets him over the works of thy hands. But now verse 9, notice who the him is. But we see Jesus, who is made a little lower than the angels. He's pulling in the Psalm 8 language. Jesus made lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, should taste death for every man. And the surprise now becomes, basically, down here, we see Jesus becomes then the organizing principle for everything that came up before. So now I reinterpret, or I understand more accurately, actually. I understand who all the hymns are all the way through here. Who is the him? Who is the man? Who is the Son of Man? Well, I mean, it can talk about humanity in general, but ultimately, I haven't understood the passage until I realized that Jesus is all of that. Jesus is the Son of Man. Jesus is the one who is put over creation. Jesus is the one who is crowned with glory and honor. See? So Hebrews 2 explains Jesus is the center of Psalm 8. And now what I get are actually, there are two ways of reading Psalm 8, and they're both valid. I can read Psalm 8 and I can see humanity in general. What is man, meaning what is mankind, that you are thoughtful of him, that you pay attention to him, and yet you've crowned him with glory and honor. You've given him dignity. You've set him over the works of your hands. Mankind, humanity, that sort of concept. I can read Psalm 8 that way. But if I go back to Hebrews 2, I discover the ultimate way to read Psalm 8 is Jesus. What is man, or the Son of Man? That you would send your Son to become human. And then you would crown him with glory and honor. And he would rule over creation. Even though for a time he was made a little lower than the angels, now he's crowned with glory and honor. And he rules over all things. And now when I put that together, then I get the answer to our question in the assignment, which was, who is the image of God? And I have at least 3 passages here, actually not including Hebrews 2, so that's another very, very important foundation for this. But at least 2 passages here that go this direction for us. One's 2 Corinthians 4:4. And it's going to say this, that Satan has blinded the minds of them which believe not, lest the light of the glorious gospel of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine unto them. Okay, notice the language, who is the image of God. Jesus is the image, or the ultimate image of God. Colossians 1:15, Jesus Christ is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creation. Hebrews 1:3, Jesus is the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power. When he had by himself purged our sins, he sat down. Okay. Let me break this thought down, or break this concept down just a little bit. Do you remember one of the ways that I expressed the image was here? And I gave you 2 concepts. One concept, here's God's nature, here's man's nature, and we're like a very dim, distant, limited image. But you see some of the characteristics of God in man. That's the idea, right? So we're not a great image, but you see at least some concepts. Okay. Now, what would it mean for someone to be the image of God? And the answer is, instead of the way I gave it to you here as kind of, a mere outline, here, we'll duplicate it. There we go. Instead of giving you what I gave here as a mere outline, where I have kind of, okay, it's a shadowy image. All right, to be the image of God would mean everything that God is, Jesus Christ is. So he is the image because it is an exact replica. It's an equals sign here. What God is, Jesus is. And it's not just a shadowy, outliney thing. For me, it's just that, right? Parts of me, aspects of me might remind you of God the way that a piece of paper can remind you of my wife. But it's just an image, and it's really, really incomplete, and it's really shadowy, and in some cases it's blurry. I mean, it doesn't, the image of God in man does not tell you the splendor and the glory and the greatness of God. It just shows you a few of the details. Okay. But when Jesus comes as the image. What that means is he is an exact image, so that everything God is, Jesus is. Everything that is God's nature is Jesus' nature. If you say it like this, if you want to know what is God like, look at Jesus. If you want to know who is God and what is his nature, Jesus is your answer. Jesus tells you who he is and what he's like, and you can see it all there. And that goes into important Christological directions. I can't do too much with this, but pay attention to the pattern. No man has seen God at any time. The only begotten who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. Okay, how do you see God, or how do you know what God is like? The answer is you look at Jesus, because Jesus tells you the nature and the image of God. Another one of these that is really profound, if you go to John 14, and you get this Jesus is saying, I'm going to leave you. And so they're worried. So some of the disciples are saying, please, can you show us like a final revelation or something like that? So John 14, Well, I'll start at verse 6. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. So how do you know the Father? How do you get to the Father? How do you understand the Father? Jesus. Okay. But if you, verse 7, if you had known me, you would have known my Father also. In other words, here's God, here's Jesus. If you know God, you know Jesus. If you know Jesus, you know God. Why? Same kasi. Parehas kasi. Right? Two persons, this gets into Trinitarian stuff. Two persons, they are separate, but they are God. Jesus reveals God. So Philip said unto him, verse 8, Lord, show us the Father, and it will suffice us. If you'll show us the Father, then we will be, we'll be happy. And Jesus answered in verse 9, have I been so long with you, and yet you have not known me? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you possibly say, show us the Father? You've already seen the Father because you've seen me. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. You see that? Okay. And so what we're getting is this pattern. Jesus reveals God. Jesus shows us what God is like. Okay? And you can do that in John 1. You can do that in Hebrews 1. God spoken 100 times to the fathers by the prophets. Or you can do this from Revelation 1. Jesus speaks for God. He is the message. He's the declaration. 1 John 1. You can do this all over the place. Okay. Jesus speaks for God. Well, when I'm doing all of that, what I'm relying on, another conceptual grid for this, is this concept. That it's not just that there's, I am showing parts of God's nature, but Jesus is different. Jesus shows God's nature perfectly, in a perfect image. Okay. One other way to see that is just to go back to the passages we were looking at just a little bit ago. So, well, maybe I need to do a new search. Give me a second. The passages we were looking at, look again at 2 Corinthians 4:4. Satan has blinded the eyes of unbelievers so that they cannot see the glory of Jesus, who is the image of God. Or Colossians 1:15, he is the image of the invisible God. Do you see the connection between image and invisible? No, use John 1 language. No man has seen God at any time. He can't be seen. He's invisible. He's not. We think invisible. We sort of think like a ghost. What that means is, if you looked at him, you would die. He can't be looked at. So not like he's just a floaty, airy thing. He can't. If you look at him, you die, which means he's invisible. He's not able to be gazed upon. No man has seen God at any time. He is the invisible, unlookable God. But Jesus is the image of the unseeable, unviewable God. I'm sorry, this is a rabbit trail, but sometime if you want to do an interesting study, start trying to track the verses that talk about God as unable to be seen. I can send you the references. Maybe I'll put it in the chat in a little bit. References that talk about God not being able to be seen. But then when you get later in the New Testament, 1 John 3, and a couple of other passages, we will see God. How will we see God? Because Jesus mediates it. Jesus makes it possible for us to see God. So there's even a concept that's linked up in there. Okay, keep on moving. Hebrews 1:3. He is the express image of his person, carbon copy, exact, full expression of the nature of God. Who God is, Jesus is that. Jesus shows us who God is. Okay. So all of that is basically a way of supporting this top notion, God's nature, Jesus' nature, which is a contrast with what we were talking about ourselves, right? I drew this, the man's nature with dotted lines. If I could, I would make it really, really, really super small and I write tiny, tiny letters in their man's nature. Then you wouldn't be able to read the diagram. It'd be a terrible diagram. But in any case, the idea of God's nature and then man's nature in this broken, shadowy way versus Jesus' nature, which is that everything God is, Jesus is. Okay. Because Jesus is truly God. Now, that was one out of two components, though, wasn't it? Because I had a second component. So, I mean, oops. Well, here I can do it that way. That's interesting. I had a second component for the image of God. The image of God was not just being a copy or showing something about God's nature, but the image of God also meant having dominion. And once I do that, or what do we mean by dominion? Not wrestling an animal to the ground. What we meant by dominion was you take care of God's creation. As the head, God says, okay, fill the earth and subdue it. Adam and Eve, take care of the place. Look after it. Make sure that everything's okay. So mankind is given this role to take care of the creation. And then you can just fast forward into the present and you can look around and say, how are we doing? And the answer is clearly we're doing terribly. Not just because there's trash in our water. I mean, that's one expression of it. Not just because we have animals going extinct. That's just one expression of it. But to talk about environmentalism again, part of the problem with environmentalism is you're looking at such a narrow slice. How about this as an expression of how we failed? Look at sin. Every time we sin, then we are dishonoring the richness and the beauty and the dignity that God gave us as his creation. What about death? Every time a person dies, what you're seeing there is a gut-wrenching paradox. It's the paradox of the fact that God made a human being in his image, and that image is precious. And so that image, that precious image, a picture of God who is immortal, a picture of God who is without sin and will never die. This picture just died. And that's awful. And so you're looking at this paradox that it's actually, part of the reason that it hurts, part of the reason it grabs our hearts is because it makes no sense. It was never supposed to be this way. Image bearers were not supposed to die. God does not die. Why are they dying? It does not make sense. It never was supposed to make sense. It is not normal. Death is like a wormhole just opened up in the fabric of the universe, and everything that was operating according to consistent principles, there's this weird exception. What? It's not normal. It's not normal. It's broken. Why is an image bearer dying? That does not make sense. Okay. That's part of the horror of death. See? And so if I look around and I look at how humans are doing taking care of the world, the answer is terribly. It's not going well. But then how am I going to see the earth or the world or the curse set aside and man finally fulfilling his role correctly? Or as I'm saying it, how am I going to see mankind actually having dominion, legitimately having dominion? And the answer, the only right answer, is that the image of God will come. The image of God will stand and reign over the earth. The image of God will have dominion written in all capital letters. The image of God will be the king over all things. And then when he is, watch what happens. Okay, God-man made man to have dominion. What happens when Jesus Christ, the image of God, reigns? Then the world itself changes. So the lion lies down with the lamb. And there is no more curse, and there is no more death, and there is no more sorrow, and there are no more tears, and there is no more sickness. The former things have passed away. The world itself, the nature of the world itself is different because the King has come, or the image of God reigns. And so now I discovered that underneath all of it, all the way back to Genesis 1:26, when God said to Adam and Eve, subdue the earth and have dominion over it, that's man's role. That is not going to be ultimately fulfilled because of sin. That will not ultimately be fulfilled until Jesus Christ, the Messiah, comes back to earth. And when you see the richness of this, when Jesus returns and you read in Revelation 20 and 21 that there is no more curse, the former things have passed away. When you're reading in 22 too, when you're reading 20, 21, 22, the no more curse, it's done. That is a fulfillment of Genesis 1:26, subdue the earth and have dominion. And the beginning of the Bible and the end of the Bible are echoing each other. Because over here, mankind was given a task to do. Mankind utterly and completely fails. And Jesus Christ, the image, fulfills the purpose of God in a rich and beautiful way. Okay. So let me give you one other concept, and then I think we'll take a break. But let me give you one other way of expressing this. When I talked about us earlier, I said that we are image bearers, or I use language like we are made in the image, or we carry the image. Okay, there's a difference here, a very critical difference here. Let's make the distinction explicit between image bearers, which I'm putting as a plural, right? I mean, I'm an image bearer, you are an image bearer. Each one of us are images or image bearers. Okay. Versus, very profound difference between that and the image of God. So I would like us to be careful about when we say something like, what is the image of God? You can say something like, well, anyway, there are many people that are expressing the image of God. We're image bearers, or we show something about the image. But actually, the language I tried to use in the question, I asked, who is the image? See, and when I ask that question that way, you're looking for something different. The image is none other than Jesus. There is a image, Isa. There is a single image of God, and Jesus Christ is that image, the image of God. What's interesting about this is you can do this with a bunch of other things. So if you start, there's a, to me, very fascinating pattern with some of this, and I've talked to you, I think, about some of this before. But start walking out a pattern like, all of us are children of God, okay? So we are all sons of God, in a way. But see, it would be very different, wouldn't it, if you said, I am the Son of God. And that's because immediately you understand there's a difference between a son of God or a child of God and the Son of God. And the kind of, to put that out graphically, the concept of it goes, yes, you have lots of these little points, lots of little like children of God, you know, individuals, lots of individuals, okay? But standing over it, there is a single, like the one, the climactic one. And so I may be a little individual down here, a child of God, right? A son of God. But Jesus Christ is the Son of God that stands above all, okay? You can do the same thing with man, son of man. So read Ezekiel, or try, you know, you can just do a search in Ezekiel. And God constantly says to Ezekiel, son of man, son of man, son of man, okay? So what's going on here? Son of man language just means, hey, human. That's all it means. We'll talk about this later in Christology. But son of man just means human. Hello, human. Okay, so next time you see one of your friends, you could say, good morning, son of man. And he goes like, what? He's like, I'm just saying hi, human. Okay. And anyway, you'll get weird looks. So all it means is human. And so therefore, all of us are, you are a son of man, or you are, C.S. Lewis has this daughter, sons of Adam, daughters of Eve. Anyway, you can be not good like that. You know, you're a son of man, or you're a son or a daughter of man, I guess. Anyway, you're a human. All right. So human, hello human, that's it. Okay, but it's different if you say the Son of Man. And actually, I can do this with a couple of other things. I'll pause there though, because this one's actually related. I think the concept goes something like this when we're talking about the image of God. It's almost, the concept I'd like you to get here is almost, Jesus is the paradigmatic. Jesus is the ultimate. Jesus siya ang tanging tao. Jesus is the ultimate paradigmatic paradigm, example, ultimate highest single human. And so using this kind of framework, again, you've got lots of humans, 7.5 billion of us running around down here, okay? But if you want to know what does humanity look like, it's not quite to say Jesus is more human than we are, but almost. Jesus is the paradigm of humanity. Jesus shows you everything humanity ought to have been and wasn't. Jesus shows you everything that is the purpose and the intention of God for humanity. And so he is the ultimate human, and therefore he's the ultimate image of God. He's the ultimate Son of Man. He's the ultimate Son of God. All of this in this sense of he is the ultimate, and we're just we're just all of the smaller points, the dimmer bulbs. He is the sun. Right? We're like the candles and he is the sun. He is the ultimate expression. Right? So when you put that together now, some of these passages that we've already seen, Jesus Christ as the image, those passages tie back in with the passages we saw earlier of us as image bearers. Okay, the image of God means that we, each one of us, show characteristics of the nature of God in this very dim, incomplete way. Okay, but you can't understand the image of God concept unless you move out of that into Jesus Christ is the image, the ultimate image. Jesus Christ is the profound, paradigmatic expression of humanity. What is humanity like? What should humanity be? There is no other answer. There is no better answer. Jesus. Jesus tells you what humanity is supposed to be like. Okay, any questions? Anything that we want to address or talk about on our way out to other things? I don't see anything yet. If you have, you realize you can ask me questions in chat. You can actually unmute yourself and you can ask me questions the same way you would ask me if you were sitting in front of me in a class. So feel free. Any questions here? All right, so we will take a break. I've got 9:28. I'll see you at 9:38. And we'll move downstairs. The great thing is if you're online, you don't even have to get out of your chair. You can go downstairs and stay in the same chair. It's incredible. One other thing before we come back in a couple of minutes, can I ask you a favor? Would you consider? I won't put this, for our BJMBC students, we make this a requirement. But for you, you guys are special. So if you'll do me a favor, it makes it easier for me to teach if I can see faces online. Of course, I have 4 wonderful faces here, so that's great. But if you're online, if you would be willing to consider turning on your camera, then that sort of helps me because then I can interact with you a little better. So anyway, pwede mamaya. We'll just come back in 10 minutes. And to make sure I give you your full 10 minutes, it's 9:29. So I'll even see you back at 9:40. I'll give you 11 minutes. We'll see you back in a couple of minutes and we'll go from there. In some art analysis, they've just demonstrated you can have a huge landscape, waterfalls, rivers, animals, mountains. You know, you can have this massive landscape. But if you put into your landscape a person, just a little tiny person, you know, way down, here's the mountains, there's the waterfalls, and at the bottom, there's a guy, just a little guy. The irony of all of this is that humans, when they look at the painting, and this is demonstrable because they can track where your eyes go. Your eyes will go first to the human. Okay. Your eyes go, what's that guy doing? And I think that also is an expression of this. As a human, what you care about is the image of God, and that's in you, see? So then when you see a picture and there's a human in it, you think humans, it's hardwired into you from the time you were a baby. It was this way. You were more interested in humans than you were interested in anything else in the room. And you can do that with babies too, right? I mean, at the very beginning, they're just kind of, but within 6 months or 8 months or something, their eyes will track the humans. They pay more attention to humans than anything else. Okay? I think there's a theological basis for this, or at least a grid for this, which is the image of God. God made us in his image. So we're very interested in the other humans because that's in our nature. Okay. I've already talked about some practical implications of the image of God, just to track the idea out so far, and so that we're understanding. I mean, the original expression of the image of God started at the creation of man, right? Oh, excuse me. Give me a second. I need to plug something in. Hello, I'm back. So the original creation or the original expression of the image of God is at creation. God made man in his image. Okay, that's stage 1. Stage 2, Jesus Christ is the image of God, right? And so if I'm asking myself, what is the image? Jesus is the ultimate expression of the image, the highest form or the highest expression of the image. Okay, but then now we can go to a stage 3. And a stage 3 would be, how does that come back around and explain my reality? Or how does that come back around to our lives? So I guess I've never thought of putting it in this format, but let's try it something like this. We'll start out in saying creational, the way God made mankind, combined with Jesus Christ as the ultimate image of mankind, or the ultimate image of God. Okay, so under creational, I'm thinking like Adam, right? But then now we're going to take this around and we're going to recognize that Jesus is the ultimate image. So I'll write the ultimate image, and the ultimate image is Jesus, the perfect image. Maybe that would be the better way to say it. The perfect image is Jesus. Okay. So we can see that what God created creationally, mankind, actually has had to be fulfilled and is fulfilled in Jesus. Right? So God made us originally so that we should have fulfilled the image. We did not. Jesus fulfills the image instead. But now watch this. Because Jesus is the image or fulfills the image, it goes back around now. So that Jesus Christ is the ultimate image of God now defines me and helps my reality. Right? Now, Jesus is the image of God, dictates who I am and how I respond. And I can see this in a couple of different passages. So, well, let's start with this. Let's go to these three passages and look at them together. 1 Corinthians 15:49. And don't worry, I'm pulling that up here as well. So let's see, there's a way somewhere in here. There we are. Great. Here, 1 Corinthians 15:49. Watch this. As we have borne the image of the earthly, the image of Adam. So that's the concept, I'm made in the image, just in my nature as I am right now. I am in the image of God. Okay, we have borne the image of the earthly. We shall also, future, bear the image of the heavenly. And what that's saying, there's some kind of parallelism, isn't there, at the end of it? There's some kind of parallelism here between who I was, or who I am even to this point. I am bearing the image of Adam. There's a parallelism between that and my bearing the image of the heavenly. The parallelism, though, being that this earthly will be set aside, and in its place I will come to have experience and be restored. So I am, and I always have been, in the image of God. But in a broken form of the image, or to use some of the language we were using earlier, some of the concepts we were using earlier. It's like if this is the image, the expression of the image for me is this shadowy, broken, dotted lines kind of expression, right? It's incomplete. As we have borne the image of the earthly, for now, yun palang, that's all I have. Eventually, I will be restored and I will bear, not exactly, but I will bear more, the image of the heavenly. I will be like Jesus. Our scripture is not afraid to even go so far to say, we will be like God, right? 1 John 3, we will be like him, or we will see him as he is. Scripture is willing to say that. It's incredible language. We will be made like God. Not entirely, but in important ways. We will be like God. Okay? So that's one passage in 1 Corinthians 15. Another passage. Here, 2 Corinthians 3:18. We all with open face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord. As we see God's glory, we are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord. Okay, so do you recall this? Do you recall this kind of concept that we said, Jesus Christ is the image? And actually, one of the passages we said for that was coming right out of 2 Corinthians 4:4. So if I'm going back here again to the passage we were just looking at, pay attention to this. This is 2 Corinthians 3:18, right? We all with open face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are changed into the same image from glory to glory. If I just go a little bit further, 4:4 is our passage that we said, Jesus Christ is the image of God. See, it's in the context. So right here, Jesus Christ is the image of God. But back here, it's applying that notion here that we are changed into the same image. What image? The image of God, as we behold the nature and the glory of God. So to behold him is to become more like him. To become more like who? To become more like the ultimate image of God, Jesus Christ. Okay, one more passage, and then I'll kind of try to complete the idea. Colossians 3:10. We have put on the new man, which is renewed. I think the modern translations say, which is being renewed, kind of a linear ongoing, in this ongoing way, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of him that created him. Remember, one of our other passages for Jesus Christ as the image was Colossians 1. Same book. I mean, it's not super close together. But Colossians 1, Jesus Christ is the image. We are being renewed after the image of our Creator. Who is that? Well, you can say God in the general sense, or putting these passages together, Jesus. We're being renewed into the image of Jesus Christ. So now if I'm putting it back into this framework again, this is who God is, right? Okay, our expression of the image of God would be this kind of like partial, halting, failing, right? We are the broken form or the failing form, right, of the image of God. Jesus is the ultimate image of God. Now, what is sanctification? And sanctification is the process of me, little by little, being restored so that I am becoming more like Jesus Christ. Because if I'm like Jesus, and Jesus is perfectly like God, he is God. To be restored into the image of Jesus Christ is to be restored, be more like God. To show image, to be like him. I mean, that's biblical language. To be like God himself, to be like him. I'm being restored into his image, see. But it's more than that, because think about who is Jesus. Jesus is fully God, fully man, right? So to be restored into Jesus' image, to be more like Jesus, actually ends up meaning that I am at the same time more like God. God is changing me into his image. We will be like him. I am conformed more to the image of God and who he is. Okay? But it is even to the level of I am able to be what humanity is supposed to be. In other words, God created me. And he made me in his image. When he made creation, it was good. So I was supposed to be a creature that brought honor and glory to God. It was supposed to be a good thing, right? But because of sin now, we have all of this horror and this awful stuff like death, sickness, coronavirus, and the rest. It's a mess. So here we are, this broken form, okay? But by being restored into Jesus' image or becoming more like Jesus, Jesus is not only fully God, he's fully man. No, go further. He is the ultimate man. He is the ultimate human. So now if I'm asking, what would a good human look like? Or what would be a good expression of humanity? How do I be a good, effective, successful human? How do I be a successful human? The answer is to be like Jesus. Because Jesus defines what is humanity or what humanity ought to be. How do I be like Jesus? Sanctification, this whole thing, salvation, this whole process. Okay, so, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say in salvation, we are becoming more human. We've always been I've always been 100% human. But we are becoming a better expression of what humanity ought to be. We are becoming what humanity ought to be. The definition of successful humanity, of life lived correctly. What is the good? I'm thinking about this question a lot right now. What is the good? What does it mean to be a successful human, a good human? The definition of that is Jesus. And the definition of that for you and for me, be like him. And the more I'm like Jesus, the more I have successfully lived my life. I have been an effective human. I have been a human that was supposed to be. I have been what I'm supposed to be as a human being. Okay, that becomes a very powerful concept, I think, for processing and just giving us a grid, linking these kinds of things together. What does it mean to be human? What is the concept of sanctification? These kinds of things. Okay, great. I mean, we have really made some good progress there. Thank you for your input and these kinds of things. Joyce, why would God want us to be like him? Good question. Okay, I mean, this is the definition of a good question because the lines are going to go out in all kinds of directions at the same time. One of the answers is, well, go back to the beginning and remember, I was made to be like him because I was made in his image. So that was creational, right? So when God made the man, he made a dog and he just said, well, we'll have a dog. That'll be nice. We're going to have a cat, we're going to have a giraffe, and because giraffes. I mean, who wouldn't think giraffes are cool? Obviously, giraffes are cool. So we just have a giraffe. But then he gets to the man and he says, this one's different. I'll make this one in my image, right? So from there, where we're going is why, when I'm being sanctified, all it is really is God restoring me back to his original intention in the first place, right? But then, like, if I'm going to a deeper question, why then did he originally choose to do that in the beginning? And I'm going to say something like, he makes a creature that is capable of thinking and pondering and understanding how beautiful, how rich he is for his own glory. So we're going to link into some ideas like God, what do you say? So God's desire for his own glory for praise, but it's richer than that, I think. It is actually, God is such a rich reality, a beautiful reality, right? The beatific vision, seeing God and who he is in his glory. That to give a creature enough intelligence to understand some of that and to be able to enjoy that, it's like God creates this creature and gives them the capacity and the opportunity so that then for all eternity, we can understand the beauty of who he is and enjoy it. Almost something like if you were a really, let's say, maybe somebody here is a painter on the level of the greats. I mean, you can paint as well as Monet and Rembrandt and all the rest. Okay. But you're doing your painting secretly, and so you've not told us, any of us. And so you're doing these masterworks and you're hiding them off in your bedroom. There's something about that that's a little sad. And what would make it more sad is if you did all of these fabulous works of art and at the end of it all, at the end of your life, you burned them all, right? Because you did this fabulous work. Why should it just be thrown away? What a waste. And I think the concept goes something like that. There is something that's just a good in inviting other people in to enjoy. Like, you know, if you have that kind of skill, go invite some friends over and bring them in and let them look at the artwork and let them enjoy how beautiful it is. See? And I think it's something like that when we're thinking of worship. It's not just that there is, you know, that God's there and then he just creates beings to praise him. We say something like, as though he's bored. No, God is sufficient in himself. As though he needs our praise. Why would he need us? But it's more like he creates these creatures and he gives them the joy of being human and of knowing and understanding and loving him and of being in awe at who he is. So we have some concepts like that. And then one other thing that Brother Jacob Nem has already said, another line that you would have to toss out here or connect out here. This is going to go back to our study in theology proper, which is the whole communicable, incommunicable thing, right? So there are these attributes of God, certain groups of attributes that we can be like him. And it's his joy for us to do that. So I think that's about as much answer as I can biblically give. Because some of these why questions, why did God do it that way? Why did God do it that way? Some of them we just don't know, especially problem of evil. I really don't know. But I think there's to me, a very sufficient answer here, going down this kind of direction. God joyfully invites beings that he's created that have enough intelligence to understand and to enjoy the worship of who he is. I think there's something in there. I think there's something valid. Okay, good. Any other questions? I'm looking at here. Yeah, right. Good, some good comments in there in the chat. Yes, ma'am. Okay, I'll put up a couple of different ones and then you tell me if I got the right one. I'll just start putting, she was asking me if I can put up one of the diagrams, but I'm not sure which one, so I'll just start trying different diagrams until we get it. Of course.
Is there something wrong with this page?
Excellent question. So the question goes, if man was created in the image of God, basically it's why did man fail? Was there something in the creation, parang, like was there like a little seed of man's nature that was broken or something? Like, in other words, you know, I'm speaking to you on a computer. I'll make this sound like an advertisement. No, I like using Apple products. One of the reasons I like using Apple products is they just work. Kind of turn it on and it just works. But that's not an accident, that's engineered. Okay, so somebody, in order to make, I've done a little bit of coding myself, in order to make a program or coding that is really robust and it just works, you have to think of all of the possible crazy things that human beings will do, and they'll do some crazy ones. And you have to think of all of those possibilities and have a solution for all of them ready for when they do this or that thing the wrong way. So the concept goes something like, was there something in man that was not quite engineered correctly enough? So that, you know, when God made man, he left a bug in line 467 of the code. And that was what happened at the fall, okay? And when we put it that way, then we have to say, of course not. Because if the Genesis account tells us anything, the Genesis account tells us 7 times, 8 times, I don't remember exactly. But it tells us a bunch of times God saw what he had made and it was good. God saw what he had made and it was good. And you get to the end, God saw everything that he had made and it was very good. And then the rest of Scripture is just very, very emphatic that there is no evil in God. In him, he is light and there is no darkness in him at all. So there's exactly 0 chance that you can trace the fall of man back to God's creational failure or something like that. But it still leaves us with the mental struggle, then why did Adam fail in the first place? And the only 2 answers I can give you, one, it is showing you that Adam had an authentic choice. Your brain, I know, is going to go right away, well, then why didn't God create us so we had no choice? Because, for instance, in eternity, I will still have a choice, I just won't ever sin. I maintain that in eternity, we still have a will. It's not that we turn into robots, but in eternity, there's no chance that we will sin. So is it like, why didn't God make it that way from the beginning? Right. Those kinds of questions I don't have an answer to. But the other answer that at least helps me a lot is, if I'm asking something like, why did Adam sin? Or was there something in Adam that made this possible, and why did God include that, or something like that? I think where this ultimately is going is it's kind of like trying to find a logical reason for sin, when in fact, by definition, there is no logical reason for sin. What Adam did was insanity. And no, it doesn't make sense. And actually, we have to confess, Adam chose to go against his nature. Adam chose to deny his nature. I haven't done this here, I don't know. Well, you can stop me if I have, but I should do this as just an illustration, just so we can kind of get this notion there. Oh, I know why, because we haven't come to this discussion yet, but now is a fine time. So let's talk about Adam's nature in the fall in the first place. If the way you're thinking of Adam's nature in the fall is something like, here, I'm sorry about this, this will look ugly on the screen, but anyway, here we are. If you're thinking something like this, like here's a pen, okay? I'm gonna balance the pen on the table. right? So what I've got here, I've got a sharp point, or I don't care, I can do the other end. I have a rounded point on the other end, okay? And so if I balance it, what's gonna happen if I let go? It'll fall, right? And you can sit here all day. I mean, I don't know, maybe there's some like street artist or something that could manage to get it to stand up, but I don't think so, because it's a sharp point. I think you could stand here all day, and no matter how you set it, if you let go, it's fallen, okay? That's not the way to think about Adam and Adam's nature. Adam's nature is not balanced in this kind of, okay, it's gonna fall kind of way. The better and the more proper way to think of Adam's creational nature when God made him would be something like this, something that has a solid base to it, okay? And this is designed now so that it's not going to fall over. It's designed now because it's a solid flat base and it's heavy. It's supposed to sit here. So if I just do nothing, well, for one thing, my table's slanted, it'll slide off. But if I just do nothing, it'll just sit here. It's not gonna fall over. How would I make this thing fall over? See, with this, to make this fall over, I just let go. If I do nothing, it falls. With this, in order to make this thing fall over, I actually have to take active steps. I actually have to push it, push, push, push against the weight. And at some point, the center of gravity extends out over the balance point, and as soon as the center of gravity is further than the balance point, it falls, okay? But I actually have to move the weight actively past that point. It means exerting effort to go against the base. I have to push against it, then it'll fall, okay? That's the better metaphor to think of when you're thinking of Adam's nature. Adam was not created neutral, as though, well, I don't know, he could go either way. It wasn't neutral. It wasn't like parang 50-50 or nasa gitna lang siya or something like that. And so, okay, you go this way, either way. It's like this. God created Adam solidly good. God created Adam to be good. And the choice to sin was a choice to push against his own nature until finally he fell. But he actually had to deny himself. He actually had to push himself to go that way. I mean, another expression of this would be something like, and this is just me, this is just my life, but I'll be honest, like the temptation to do drugs has never been a thing for me. Like I don't wake up in the morning and like, today I will resist, I won't do drugs today. The concept of, you know, going out and getting a needle and pulling up some chemicals and putting it in my veins so that I can be out of reality for a couple of hours sounds awful. Okay, so I have exactly zero temptation to do drugs. But it would be almost like I start pushing myself, but like, you should try it. Come on, Joel, give it a try. And I start pushing myself over a period of weeks or months, and I start hanging out with people that do it, and I start like, you know, Googling it and watching videos about it and reading books about what's it like to be high on drugs and finding out what the prices are and buying needles and stuff, like, you know, right? In other words, it's actually actively exerting effort to push myself in a direction that would be self-damaging. And so I'm actually exerting effort to get there. That's the better metaphor to think of for Adam and Eve. That they're actually denying something in their nature that was good. And they chose to rebel. It wasn't just like evenly balanced and kind of, it could go either way. And, it went. They actually actively chose to turn against God. Or another way to say it, they had every reason to stay faithful, and yet they rejected all of that. If I used a different metaphor, I could understand if you grew up in a home where your father was abusive, your mother was manipulative, all they ever did was fight, and there was never any good food for you there. There was nothing, there was no protection, there was no safety. I could imagine if you chose to rebel and to run away from home. I mean, that's quite understandable. Okay, like ethically, you shouldn't rebel, but I could understand, okay? But like if you have a loving, safe home that provides everything you could ask for, and a father that cares about you, and a mother that's there and asks you daily how you're doing, and then to take all of that, turn, rebel, and hate them is really sad, right? Because you actually pushed against a positive foundation. You actually had to rebel, chose to rebel. That's the picture we want to use for the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve had a relationship with God. They were in a garden, Everything was right. Everything around them was perfect. I mean, it was the ideal situation. And in all of that, they chose to turn against it. That's insanity. It's insane. Okay, but it's no less insane anytime I sin. Anytime I sin, it's me turning upwards to a good, wonderful creator who made a beautiful world for me to live in. I turn my hands upward toward him and I say, I hate you, I'm doing my own thing. That's the definition of sin. And that is what sin is. So sin is always insanity. It makes no sense. Okay, any questions there? Tama. Lahat. Yeah, I mean, she was just pointing out that when you think about Adam and Eve in the garden, and then you can immediately see what's happening with sin because they start tossing blame. Well, you can hear it in Adam's word. It was the one. He doesn't just say it was the woman. It was the woman that you gave me. So, I mean, he blames. You see what's happened in here. If this relationship before, there's a vertical relationship, good relationship with God, horizontal relationship, good relationship with his wife. So upward, horizontal, it's good. Immediately sin has distorted both of these. So that sin goes, it was her that you gave me. See? And so simultaneously toss the blame at your fellow human and attack the God who created your fellow human. See, sin has immediately distorted everything. I mean, you like mere verses later, and you're already seeing how disgusting sin turns things. It's right there immediately. I could do more there. We could go back to the Genesis 3 passage. You can see the implications of sin for work, because immediately, right, Adam is going to work, and by the sweat of his brow. The implications for the world, thorns and thistles will it make. So the world is going to be different now. Specifically and tangibly, the reason that we're struggling with things like coronavirus in March 2020, it goes back to that. This is the thorns and the thistles. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Down to relationships and family. Family is going to be affected because now even the process, even the beginning of childbirth is going to be awful. And it just keeps on going from there. I mean, it's all messed up. The relationships between marriage. So she's going to struggle. Your desire will be to your husband. He will rule over you. It will now be a competitive thing. So what should have been a place of safety now will be a place that there will be tension. Now, of course, by God's grace and sanctification and the image of God and so forth, it is possible for it still to be a place of safety. But you know, sin still kicks in every once in a while. Married people have fights. So, I mean, there you go. Everything has been affected. It's all broken by sin. Good. That's all that is really depressing and hopeless and helpless, but we'll go to a good place. So let's go back to our notes, and I want to introduce you to kind of the next concept that we'll talk about. And I think this is the right time to do it. So let's go to, just a second, page 79. I'm jumping a bit ahead of things, but so we'll come back earlier in the page numbers and we'll look at some other topics earlier there. But for now, I'm on page 79. What I have here, I call this the restoration of man. What I have here are 5 stages of humanity or something like that. To me anyway, I think some of these concepts are really helpful for me. By the way, I'm not unaware of your questions. Some of you guys asked me some questions here. But those questions are things I'll address here. So that's kind of part of the reason I'm on page 79, because we'll go there. You were asking some questions about glorification and things. So here's kind of like 5 stages of humanity. And the concept I want you to get, these are 5 very different expressions, 5 very different, quote, humanities, right? Even though there are 5 very different humanities, they are all equally human. So if I ask something like, what is humanity like? Okay, I just say, what is humanity like? Then your immediate thought is stage 2 on this list, the after Eden fallenness. Why? Because everybody you know in your life is like that. Everybody you know is in stage 2, or actually, technically, I should say stage 4 as well. You know some people in stage 4. Lord willing, I know everybody I'm looking at is in stage 4. But everybody I know is in stage 2 or stage 4, which means all of us are broken by the fall. And therefore, you can be excused or forgiven for thinking, when you think humanity, you automatically and naturally think broken humanity. See? But what I want you to know is that all 5 of these stages are true and authentic humanity. In fact, none of them are more authentic than the other. All of them are true and authentic humanity. Okay, so let's start with the first. Garden of Eden, innocent holiness. God created man with no sin. They obviously had the ability to choose sin. So that's kind of back to my concept that I was giving with a pen or the bottle, or something with a solid base. In other words, they could choose sin, and they did choose sin. When they chose sin, however, they chose against their nature, not in keeping with it. That makes sense. They chose against who they were. They actually denied something about themselves. It's like, waking up one morning and saying, I'm tired of having a hand. I think I'll cut this one off. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. They actually denied something of the richness that God had made them in. Okay, you see the results of this. You see the profound toxicity of sin. Their sin immediately spreads. And so every human being that's ever been born since, except for one, has this same toxic nature. That's stage 2 then. After Eden is fallenness. So I think I did this before. I did this last week. But if you want, you can recover this concept. If you go back to Genesis 4, so you see the fall in Genesis 3 and you see the curse. Okay, but then you go to chapter 4 and immediately you have the implications where the brothers are at war. You have murder. You have people like boasting, proud. You have people cut off from God. Cain is driven off. And then Lamech is saying to his wives, what? God created a man and a woman, okay? But now in Genesis 4, we already have wives. Lamech is saying to his wives, you thought Cain was bad, I'm way worse because I killed somebody and I'll kill more. So now you have people boasting about doing murder. Okay, it just the whole thing gets awful in no time at all. It gets terrible. Okay. So we put that together and we recognize that the implications of sin turns into this profoundly corrupt, disgusting stew of toxic vileness. Okay, that comes down to 3. And this gives us a little bit of hope now, though. Because Jesus Christ is the expression of ideal humanity, paradigmatic, ultimate, perfect humanity. Jesus Christ is the ultimate and perfect human. And this is rich now. Jesus Christ is genuinely and uniquely human. Jesus Christ is human in a way that no other one has. So I have 5 categories on here. Category 3, there's only one example there. Actually, I guess technically category 1 is interesting too, because you only ever had 2 humans that were in that category, Adam and Eve, right? So category 1, there's only ever been 2. Category 3, there's only ever been 1, Jesus. And Jesus is the ideal or the unique human. In a real sense, he is the paradigmatic human. Paradigm or the example. He is the example human. He is the ultimate. He defines what humanity is. The concept of paradigm would be something like, let's say you have a key, and this key is the key that unlocks all the doors in this building. It's not. And the reason I say it's not is because actually, I don't know if you've heard of this, it's crazy. There have been cases where somebody took a picture of a key, and if you have a high enough resolution picture of the key, you can break that down, create a 3-dimensional model of it, and then you can print a model of that and make a key just based off of pictures. And it's been done where a politician or a policeman or something had a key hanging off his belt, and someone took a high-definition picture of it and then copied the key. It's literally been done. Anyway, this will not be a high enough resolution for you to copy my key. You wouldn't do that to me. Anyway, so here's the key. All right, this key then is like the paradigm. And so I go out and I make 100 copies of this key. and I distributed it to all the students. Okay. Well, if this key is wrong, all the other keys are wrong. If this key is correct, all the other keys are correct. Because this key is the paradigm. This key is the example that defines all of the rest. Okay? So this is the starting copy. And this copy defines everything else. Okay? Jesus Christ is the defining human. And actually, if you go something like, wait, no, isn't that Adam? Then Paul has an answer to that. For your entire life until salvation, yes, you were made after the copy of Adam. So, I mean, actually, when it turns out, Romans 5, 1 Corinthians 15, when it turns out every human is either after the paradigm of key 1, Adam, which means sin, broken, in a terrible place, or key 2, paradigm 2, Jesus. And so if you're after the pattern of Jesus, then you have life. Jesus, though, is the ultimate paradigmatic human in that he tells us what humanity ought to be. And so when you look at, this is why it's incredibly critical, and this is Christology, that's next class, but it's incredibly critical to understand and recognize that Jesus is fully, authentically, 100% human. You cannot like put any kind of asterisks on them. If I say something like, Jesus is every bit as much human as you are, you're supposed to say, yes. Don't hear that and go, no, I'm human means I have foibles, I'm broken, I sin. Okay, I understand that's stage 2 humanness or stage 4 humanness, but you've missed something. And that is the fact that the only humans you've ever known are the broken humans. Okay, but Jesus is also a fully authentic human. He is fully human. And don't pause at that and go something like, what? No, Jesus is human, 100% human. 100% human, 100% God. You've got to believe that Jesus is authentically human. Okay, to get kind of the metaphor for that, today is the day of using cups for illustrations. I have here a coffee cup. It's a teacup today, I suppose. Anyway, it holds coffee or tea equally. This is my cup. If my cup was broken and leaked, highly inconvenient, right? Because then, while you're trying to drink from it, it's dribbling down your shirt, it's making a mess of everything. So it's all socially embarrassing and everything, okay? So it's a terrible situation. But let's just say that all you ever knew in your life experience was broken coffee cups. And so, that's been your whole life. So your whole life, somebody says coffee cup, what you assume, coffee cups are great, they hold your coffee, and it's a great way to get it into your mouth. Also long. The only problem with coffee cups is, they do pour all over your shirt and they stain your clothes. That's the only sad thing about coffee cups. But anyway, we just have to use them. It's just the way coffee cups are. Right? That's the only way you've ever known coffee cups. And so you assume that it is an inherent part of the nature of coffee cups. One of the drawbacks of using a coffee cup is stained clothes. It's a real pain. Right? And then one day somebody comes along and they introduce you to an unbroken coffee cup. And for the first time in your life, you realize coffee cups don't have to be that way after all. It is actually possible to drink your coffee from a cup and not have stained clothes. It's incredible. And your whole life breaks open in a new way because you've never even realized that it was possible for coffee cups to be so. Okay? That is your experience of humanity. In other words, the only humans you've ever met in your life, and you yourself are included, of course, are the broken ones. You've spent your entire life experiencing the broken expression of humanity. And so it's only natural that after a lifetime of that, you assume that is humanity. You assume that humanity works this way. You assume that humanity is inherently broken because that's the only humanity you have experienced. And so if you say something like, yeah, humans are great, but they sure can be a pain sometimes, that's because the only kind of coffee cups you ever drank from were the ones that had cracks in the side, and they dumped all over your clothes and you ended up with stains. And you're saying basically, the absurd thing you're saying is, well, coffee cups are nice, but you just have to deal with the stains. And the answer to that would be, could you get a coffee cup that doesn't have a crack in it? Okay. The only kind of humans you've known are the weak, failing, sinning, dying kind. And so I don't blame you. I don't blame, we should blame ourselves because we should read our Bibles better. But it's understandable that we assume it's a normal part of life for people to sin and die. It's not. Biblical confession is clear and absolute. It is not normal for humans to sin and die. It's broken. Hindi dapat ganun. It never should have been that way. And when you put that all together, then you realize there is a humanity, an authentic humanity that is not the broken. Okay. Someone commented here, ha ha ha, we are all broken coffee cups. Right. Correct. We are all the broken cup. Okay, but here's the good news. We have stage 4. And stage 4 is Christians redeemed and being restored. So here, the good news goes, if we are the broken coffee cup metaphor, we are all broken coffee cups. We are all in the process of being restored. So, I mean, here, my entire life, every human I've known is the broken kind. But then I have a lot of friends and people I love deeply that are like me. We're little by little trying to be restored. And so little by little, here is this gash crack across the side of the cup, and it leaks terribly. And so little by little, it's getting patched. And it's a slow, painstaking process. And at times, you almost feel like you don't even see the progress. You almost feel like you're not making progress. Have hope. Be not discouraged. The progress is still happening. Sanctification is the process of God bringing you back to what you were supposed to be. And so little by little, he's changing you, he's fixing you, he's restoring you. And so little by little, you are becoming what you ought to be. And it should be no surprise then that if the expression of humanity in stage 2 is the broken form, metaphor of the coffee cup that's dumping coffee all over your clothes, it should be no particular process that the best thing you can do to make yourself a more successful human, or let's say a human that's easier to live with, or in no surprise that the best thing you can do to help your marriage, or to help your relationship with your friends, or to be a better coworker, or anything, just to be a better person, the best thing you can possibly do is sanctification, being restored. I mean, I could do this on all kinds of layers and all kinds of levels. Like if God called you to be a missionary, okay, you go into a new place and they have different customs and they have different ways of doing things and so on and so forth. What's the very most important skill for a missionary to have? Everybody knows language skills. No. Okay. Learning the customs. No, I don't think so. Okay, putting on the right clothes. No, I'll tell you the most important skill for any missionary. Ready? If God calls you to be a missionary, here's the secret. You ready? The fruit of the Spirit. Don't be proud. Don't be hard to be with. Don't be selfish. Don't think that your way is the only right way. Recognize that there are other groups of people that have other ways of doing things, and that's allowed, and that's okay. See? So, I mean, you can go somewhere, and even if you, like, maybe, I don't know, make the mistake, you don't know how to use chopsticks well or something. Or, you know, you say this certain thing and it has a different meaning and you didn't know that. Oops, embarrassing. How many thousands of times have I said offensive things by accident? Even if you say those things, if people know that you love them, and if you're humble, and if you're willing to learn, that's going to help, right? They'll forgive you for dropping your chopsticks if you'll be a loving person, right? Don't you think? Okay, the best thing you can do in a context is the fruit of the Spirit. What do you need in your marriage? There are marriage books that give you little like secret tips and advice and stuff like, well, women think like this, men think like this. Okay, so if you're a woman, make sure you say it this way. I don't know. I mean, I guess those things can be minimally useful. But the best thing for a marriage to go well, fruit of the Spirit, be a humble, loving, kind, servant type of person. And that's going to go far. Men and women, they're different, but they're not as different as we make them out to be. At the end of the day, we all just need to show the fruit of the Spirit. At the end of the day, say, I'm sorry, and serve the other person and love them. And that's going to be the best thing you can possibly. You see this? Okay. So put that in stage 4. The very best thing you can do to be a more effective human is to be restored into the image of Jesus Christ. The best thing you can do to have a more successful marriage, to be a better parent, to be a better coworker, to be a better missionary, to be a better pastor, to be a better, I don't care, anything. To be a better human is to be restored into the image of Christ. Maybe I'll toss in one other concept that kind of links it. We can do all kinds of things here, but I'll toss in one other concept that links here. I just mentioned men, women, marriage. Men and women are different, but not as different as we think they are and stuff like that. One concern or burden or something I have is that we can sometimes have an underlying assumption, something like, okay, if I'm going to have a women's class, or if I'm going to have a women's seminar or something like that, then I need to have some kind of women's theology. I need to go to like Proverbs 31 or the book of Ruth or Titus 2 or one of the lady passages. And so I'll always have, like, I mean, it's a little sad, but like all the women's seminars are out of like 6 passages or something, right? And we just always go back to the same passage. What is the thing that women need? What do mothers need? What do wives need? How do we help women in our churches? Ladies, how can you be helped? How can you serve other ladies and be a blessing to other ladies? Okay, here it is. Theology is for all of us. And so what that means is Genesis to Revelation is not for the boys. And Proverbs 31 and Ruth and about 2 other passages are for the girls. Okay, here's the way this works. The Bible is for humans. That's the way that works. The Bible is for humans. Okay. So what's the secret to being a submissive wife who is able to be a blessing to her husband and who is able to fulfill the Proverbs 31 concepts and so on and so forth? Okay. Not to focus strictly on just the girl stuff. The secret here, be like Jesus, right? Theology, sanctification. And so if I am being sanctified, that's going to take one form, and that's going to express itself in terms of masculinity, leading my family, taking responsibility, being willing to say I'm sorry when things don't go right, and stuff like that. Okay, that's going to take one form of it. If my wife is working on sanctification and being like Jesus, it will take a different form of it. But at the end of the day, it's really not very different. At the end of the day, both of us need to be like Jesus. Okay. And so like a deep focus on gender roles in a way that takes us in any way from the fundamental, which is that sanctification is the same at its core, it actually distracts us from the most important stuff. Okay, any questions there? Any interaction we have there? I think I stirred up enough controversy. Actually, I didn't say that much, so it was controversial. Let's see. That takes us to stage 5, and stage 5 would be full restoration glorification. Sawakas, at last. I will try to answer some of the questions that you asked earlier. The final state of man is our full restoration. So all of the weakness and pain that we associate with human experience will be gone. The best we can comprehend is that the joys of human life will be there without the struggle and the sin that has always accompanied them. I've said this earlier when we were talking about the image of God, but I'll come here again. Man was created to work, right? And so work is not a bad thing. That's another part of our broken society that if we accept it, something went off here. Like the idea that you work so that you can have vacation, right? That's broken. Work should be an enjoyable part of your life. I was coming in, you know, technically what I'm doing right now is part of my job. Okay? But I was walking in this morning, coming in here, and I just thought, I am so glad I get to do this. Because this is what I love. Okay. Well, that's what we're going for anyway. And not all work is that way. As much as I love teaching, I hate grading. So, you know, there are aspects of every job that is like, they're definitely, so that's also reality. Okay. But man was made to work. We're supposed to enjoy our work, love our work. Okay. And I can prove this actually for you. If you cannot work for a period of months or years, you'll get depressed. That's a fact. I mean, if you can't do any work, and by work I mean everything. I'm talking about that work could mean, you know, taking care of your home and raising your children. That's part of work. If you can't work, if you're stuck in a bed and you just lay there and stare at the ceiling, You might enjoy the first 3 days watching Netflix all day and reading books, but by day 4, you're miserable. You want to do something because you were made to work. Okay. So we were made to work. Work is not a bad thing. What will that look like in eternity? Well, the problem with work, and the reason why everybody speaks of work as a bad thing, is because way back in Genesis 3, God cursed the world. And because of sin now, thorns and thistles will it produce. And so now work is not only a good, but work can also be frustrating. Or another way of saying it, sometimes you work and you work and you work and you try to create this thing and it doesn't work. I have a favorite quote that stuck in my head from Irina. And she said this one time because I asked her, she's a computerish person and so am I. And so I said to her, you like working on computers? And she said, I love it when they work. Right? And I think of that 1,000 times because I spend all this time like trying to get some system created or whatever. If I get done and the system works, that's cool. Okay. If I get done and the system still won't work, and so you troubleshoot and you go in, and the basic answer is, don't know, it's just not working. This won't talk to that. That's all. That's frustrating. Makes me mad, right? Come on, you're supposed to talk to each other. Okay. Well, that's it. Thorns and thistles. Sometimes work is great. Sometimes work is frustrating. Really frustrating. Okay. So what will it be like to be in eternity? And the answer is all of the stuff that you love about activity and work, the stuff you enjoy, you're going to do that, just without the frustrating parts. You're going to use your human creativity and ingenuity to create things, to do things, to have ideas. You're going to do this, and you're going to do it without the frustration. And you're going to love it. And most of all, you're going to do this for the glory of God. You're going to do this because you love Him. And it's going to be deeply fulfilling. Okay, 2 other layers to this. One thing I care about a lot here as a concept is for us to recognize that eternity will be corporeal. It will be physical. So one of the ideas that floats around that's really negative that you need to just, here it is. Here's an idea. Okay, get out your theological machine gun and just blow that thing out of the air. That thing needs to go. All right, get rid of it. Is an idea that eternity is where we just kind of float around like ghosts, sitting on clouds, strumming our guitars. Okay. We're in this sort of spirit existence, and we're just kind of... And in its place, what you have to put in here is your body, your physical body will rise again. Your physical body will rise again. Okay? And that's really important. I'm shocked when I get out there and talk and hear questions and stuff like that, how many people are not sure about that? Because in our minds, we have replaced biblical teaching with a kind of a concept that heaven is a floaty, ghosty thing. As though somebody could walk up into you in eternity and they could like put their fist and go right through you because you're a ghost. Okay? And in its place, we have to believe in the physical bodily resurrection. Your physical body will rise again. Actually, that's a fundamental. I mean, that's at the core. That's one of the one out of a set of maybe 10 or 15 doctrines that is a critical foundation to believe. A physical bodily resurrection of Christ. Some people aren't sure about that either. And a physical bodily resurrection of our bodies. Critical truths. Okay. And even though I promised that I would answer your question, I think I'm going to propose that we take a break before I answer your questions. So some of you are asking me here, will we look like ourselves in heaven, or will we look like something else? I'm listening to an audiobook right now. I'll try this. This will probably be terrible. It won't work at all. But it's called Wonder. Oh no, that actually works. It's called Wonder. And it's a really interesting book. The tenet of the book, it's fiction, but the tenet of the book is a boy who was born and his face was deformed. And so there's a word for it, I forget, but it's, it's just really very different looking face. Okay, so as soon as you see the face, you go, whoa. And this is a genetic condition. It exists. I've seen and known people that have this. Okay, so then it's talking about his experience. and what it's like. And everywhere he goes, he walks into a restaurant and people look horrified and then look away. He goes to school and kids think that he has the plague and they don't want to touch him because they think that maybe they'll catch the disease or something. People beat him up and make fun of him. Nobody wants to be friends with him. Right? It's a very, very, very interesting book. But at some point in the story, he says to his mom, "Mommy, when I get to heaven, will we still look the same or will I get a new face?" So that's the question we're asking. Will I still look like the same person? And so are there features of yourself that you don't like? Will those features still be there? If you have a scar, will that scar still be there? If you wear glasses, will you still wear glasses in heaven? I think obviously not, but all right, I want you to think about that. So let's take a 10-minute break. I've got 10:40, and we'll come back at 10:50 or even 10:51, yea, verily 10:51, because the clock's about to change. So I'll see you in 10 minutes. 10:51, we'll be back and we'll start talking about whether you'll wear glasses in heaven or not. See you in a bit. But there's some good questions that were asked here, and others of you would ask the same questions too. So let me pause and talk about those for a second or two, because I think some of them could be helpful. Someone was asking this, the question went, when Jesus Christ ascended into heaven, does that mean his humanity or his humanness ceased to exist? So at that point, he was no longer human because he's God, but he ascended into heaven and kind of like he laid aside his humanness or something like that. And that's a common question, and it's a common thing that people ask about. Here, I'll just put it up for you here. Give me a second. 1 Timothy 2:5 is your answer. And it's just a very clear statement. So there's one God and there's one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus. If you're looking at the language of that carefully, then it's not telling you like in the past or something like that. I mean, it's quite explicit, isn't it? There is, as in right now, there is one God, right? And right now, that one God is the mediator between God and men. And then look at the last clause there, the man Christ Jesus. So Jesus Christ is human today, okay? And this is more Christology question, so we'll hit it in a future class, the next class. I love Christology. I love the doctrine of Christ. So we'll talk about that more next class. But in any case, it's definitely worth knowing right now. It's not that Jesus was human when he was on earth. Jesus is human in eternity right now. Jesus is human. How about this? This is an interesting one. Yeah, check this. So let's see. Let's look for Son of Man language. And, well, I should be more specific because it's going to get me. Okay. So this is a pattern. It happens some in the Old Testament. It really picks up in Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And this is where he's saying to Ezekiel, Son of Man. So what he means by Son of Man is human. Okay, clearly Ezekiel is not like the Son of Man or something like that. So when he's speaking to Ezekiel, he's just saying, hello, human, like that, okay? So we have that language. I hope that you remember, but if you don't, it's okay, we'll hit it in Christology. The really critical passage here is, let me just skip to it, Daniel 7, and one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven. So the Son of Man, when I say Son of Man means human, the expression here in Daniel 7 is a human came up before God and received all dominion and authority as king of the universe. So if that kind of has you scratching your head a little bit, who is this human that has all authority over all heaven and earth? I mean, all kingdoms are given to him. Well, who is that human? And the answer is, if you go to Matthew, all of a sudden, in the New Testament, Jesus starts constantly referring to himself as the Son of Man. And so what he's saying with Son of Man is, I am human, but not just that I am a human, I am the human. I am the Daniel 7 human. It's actually really parallel to some of the ideas we've done with image of God already, doesn't it? Isn't it? Because, so we are image bearers, but Jesus is the image, okay? We are all sons of men. We are all children of man. But Jesus is the Son of Man. right? Kind of concept. So that becomes an important pattern in the Gospels. And I'll just skip ahead because I want to show you how this works. When you get to John, you get to the end of John, the last place in the Gospels is John 13, Son of Man. Acts 7, Philip sees the heavens opened and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. And then Hebrews 2 quotes Psalm 8. Who is man, what is man, or the Son of Man that thou visitest him? Okay, but do you see that? This was John, and then Acts and Hebrews, those are the only two places where I have, in all of the epistles, Son of Man language, until I get down to Revelation 1:13. And Revelation 1 and Revelation 14 again, I have this expression happens twice. In the midst of the seven candlesticks, I saw one like unto the Son of Man. And it describes him, he's clothed with a garment down to the foot, he's girt with a golden girdle, his head and his hairs are white like wool, as white as snow, his eyes like flame of fire, his feet like brass burned in a furnace, his voice is the sound of many waters, he had in his right hand 7 stars, out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, his countenance was like the sun, I fell at his feet as dead. Okay, there's a bunch of stuff in this language here that sounds like descriptions of God, as in Daniel 7, where is the other place? Daniel 7, Ezekiel 1, Ezekiel 10, even to some extent Isaiah 6, where you have these other descriptions of someone seeing God and what is God like. A lot of that language gets pulled in here. What's striking is things like his face shining like the sun, and one other, I forget, one of the other details here, sounds like the transfiguration, which is clearly, so Jesus, when Jesus was transfigured before him, his face shone like the sun. Okay. So it pulls in language about God, it pulls in language about the transfiguration. But all of that is described to someone who is like unto the Son of Man. What that means is he is human. He is human and he is God. He is fully human and he is fully God. And this is in Revelation. This is after Jesus has ascended into the presence of the Father, so on and so forth. So John sees someone like unto the Son of Man, a human who is shining in glory. He is fully God, but he's also fully man. So to answer the question that the person asked in the chat, my answer is absolutely. Jesus is truly, today, 2020, Jesus Christ is fully God, fully man, even until the present. And I think that's important to know, just to recognize that his humanity was not like a temporary thing that he put on and then that he threw away, but he actually assumed human nature. So maybe a way to say it is, he continues to be the paradigm of what humanity ought to be. In other words, right? My example, what is humanity? How does it work? How should it be? My example is not just a past thing that happened 2,000 years ago, it's gone. But actually, my past example of humanity continues into the present. He is still truly and fully God, truly and fully man. Okay, sorry, Sister Joyce, you asked, do you think the Son of God, I can't talk. Do you think the Son of God, before he became man, he was not man, but he was spirit? And another great question. We will do work in the future on the angel of the Lord, and what we'll discover is the angel of the Lord, or my preferred way of saying it, the messenger of the Lord, is Jesus. So it's very clear in the Old Testament that Jesus is there, that Jesus exists. All right, that's clear. But you are correct. Jesus assumed humanity 2,000 years ago, meaning he became human 2,000 years ago. He was not human before that. So before that, he was spirit, right? He was fully God. So for thousands of years, yea, verily, for all eternity, Jesus, the Son of God, was fully God. 2,000 years ago, Jesus assumed humanity, became man, took flesh, the language of Philippians 2. He took flesh, it was a new thing. And that was something that had not been true of him before, that he could be said fully man. And after that, he is fully man. So there is something like that. Okay. And there's more things we could chase down there. We could talk, a question that could come up, well, then does that mean he changed? So that would be we have to have a better understanding of what is immutability, that God does not change. There's a whole set of conversations we could have down that track. I won't go there unless you force me. All right, and then here, let me get one other comment in here. This was another private message, but this is in respect to eternity. So where we left off, I asked you this question: will we still look like ourselves in eternity? Will I walk up to you and be like, "Oh, Brother Jacob," or will we just, have completely different appearances? So that was the question we were asking. A related question that was in the chat was, I'll just read what they said. Do they really see what's happening here on earth? Can they still be affected by what their loved ones are experiencing on earth? Sometimes I get bothered by believers when they say, I know my mom is still watching from heaven and rejoicing with me in the context of their wedding or their graduation. I personally refrain from things like that. I don't say that. And the simple answer is I don't know. So the closest thing you can get is like, you have this Luke 18, Lazarus and the rich man. And so there's sort of some kind of expression of them like, paying attention across between heaven and hell, and what about my brothers and stuff like that. So you have that. You have the angels rejoice in heaven when one soul comes when one lost soul is found. So some sense that the angels are paying attention, I suppose. And Ephesians 3 has an idea that God wants to make known to the angels what he's doing in the church. So that would give you some sense that the angels are paying attention and in awe or amaze at what God is doing. So, that's like, I think I've just said everything we know, the best we can say. But some sense of like humans in heaven looking down, I guess I say that's not everything. In Revelation, we have a few places where God sends judgment on the earth and the people in heaven respond. Okay, I guess. But the idea of glorified people in heaven looking down and like, their child graduates and they're like, aw, or something like that. We just don't have any Bible to support something like that. And my suspicion, my intuition is they have much, much better things to be doing. I don't think that, I wouldn't view that heaven is completely cut off from earth. God is still glorifying himself by things that are happening here on earth. But any kind of concept that they're all up there, like looking down on what we're doing, I guess there's a little bit of an implication in that like we are the center of everything. Like we're the center of the universe. And so because I'm alive, then that makes me important. And even everybody in heaven is looking at me. I don't know. I don't know that any of us are that important. So basically, I can't definitively say, no, they're not paying attention at all. But my intuition, my suspicion is no. And in any case, I'm very confident that I can't say, my mom is looking down at me and she's watching what I'm doing. Well, I know that my mom isn't because she's still alive. But my grandpa, I don't know if my grandpa is looking down and watching me or not. I can't say that he is. And so I want to make it a theological habit not to say things that I can't prove. Don't say things that you're not sure about. You can say like, oh, I would hope that maybe my grandpa is watching. I guess, but why? Just only say things that you actually know are true. Yeah, the Hebrews, I thought of that earlier, the Hebrews 12, a great cloud of witnesses. We could get into the exegesis of that. My understanding of that would be their lives and their testimonies are a ongoing witness to us so that we can look back on what they did, and that becomes a testimony to me to be faithful. But I don't think I can prove from that they're watching or something. Okay, so let me go back to the question that I've asked I think 3 times and never answered. Will we look like ourselves? Will there be changes and that kind of thing? So great, good interaction there. Some good comments that were put in here. There is one piece of data I can give you. Let's see how quickly I can find it. In Daniel, there's a place where he receives a vision from an angel, okay? And then later on, the angel comes back, and Daniel comments that he saw the man that he had seen before returning again. I'm just seeing if I can, I might need to find it during the break because I'm not finding it here. There we go. Daniel 9:21. Give me a second, I'll show it to you. Daniel 9:21. So he's already received a vision from one angel, right? He's already received a vision from Gabriel. Then Daniel 9:21, he just comments to say, oops, wrong window. Sorry. Daniel 9:21, he comments to say, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, he touched me about the time of evening oblation. All I'm saying with this is Daniel has already received a vision from Gabriel. So then Gabriel comes back the next time, and Daniel says, oh, that guy, as if he recognizes him. Okay. So there's some sort of sense that the same guy he saw before is the guy he sees now, and he recognizes them in some way. That would be one example. The other example I could possibly pull in here would be the Transfiguration. So in the Transfiguration, you have Moses and Elijah appear with Jesus. Somehow the disciples know that it's Moses and Elijah. How do they know? Clearly they didn't have a picture, right? They can't check out their Facebook profile. There's no way to know anything like that. So how do they know? Maybe Jesus told them. Maybe Moses and Elijah introduced themselves. I don't think so. Anyway, somehow there was some way that they recognized who was Moses, who was Elijah. Now, just to recognize, be honest with it, that's an interesting question. In the case of Moses, at least, that's his spirit, not his body. Because Moses' body is still somewhere on planet Earth. I mean, it's long since decayed. But Moses' body was left here. It's not yet been glorified. But in any case, somehow or another, they're able to see Moses and Elijah and recognize them. Okay? But the biggest, by far, piece of information that would help us answer this question is if I'm thinking about Jesus. So Jesus dies, he rises again, he's glorified now. What does that mean? And the answer is the disciples are still able to recognize him. So it's not like Jesus appears in their midst and they go, who is this? As soon as they see him, they know it's Jesus. Okay, there's even some really interesting, recognizable things like Jesus says to Thomas, Thomas, you don't believe in me? Okay, or you don't believe that I'm alive? Put your hand into my side, put your fingers here, and be no more doubting but believe, which is giving you a little bit of a hint that even the marks, the wounds are still there. Now, I have no idea. Are those there eternally? I'm inclined to say yes, because I can go forward to Revelation, and I can see as a lamb as if having been slain. So I have information like that all the way up in Revelation. I'm inclined to think that in the case of Jesus, the marks are still there. But I don't know that that's necessarily sets the pattern paradigmatic. I don't know that that's necessarily setting the pattern for all of us. In other words, if I got my hand chopped off, will I still have my hand chopped off in heaven? I don't think that I want to go there. So once I get to this point, the information I've given you so far is, from what I can tell, will still be recognizable. As in, I don't think you're going to get to heaven and I'm going to look like a completely different something. I think I'm going to look like me. I think we're also, there's at least some indication that, okay, I'll just stick with recognizable. So we're indications with Jesus' glorification and so forth. Nobody was surprised about, who is this person or something like that. But now here, let me tell you where the information gets complicated, because there's other complications. Do you remember the road to Emmaus? And Jesus walked together with the disciples. And as they're talking along, Jesus is just talking to them normally, okay? And they don't even know it's him. And then at some point their eyes are open and they realize it's him. Okay? So you have that. You have, in other words, an indication that even after his glorification, he just looked like another person. It's not like he was shining or glowing or something. He just looked like another person. But do that in comparison to like Saul on the road to Damascus, and he sees Jesus and he's flat on his face. Or John in Revelation 1, where he sees Jesus and his face is shining like the sun, and he has the sword from his mouth and eyes like a flame of fire, and John falls on his face. Okay, so when I put some of that information together, I have a little bit of a contrast here where it's kind of like after Jesus' resurrection, he chose to present himself or to show himself to his disciples in physical form that maybe almost looked a lot like before he died. But after he ascends to heaven, there's a more glorious expression somehow. There's something like that. So something in the information is going on here. I don't know. I don't know what the explanation is there, except that maybe when he ascends to the Father, then he assumes the full glory of who he is, or something like that. But I don't know how else to put the information together. And then let me give you another piece that just sort of complicates it. I say something like, you know, you'll get to heaven, and I assume I would, from what I can tell reading these passages, you will recognize me. You won't think I'm a different person or something like that. At the same time, just think about this. For instance, my grandfather. I only knew my grandfather when he was 60 and up, right? So when I think James Hancock, he's passed away now. When I think James Hancock, that's what I think. An older guy, right? No hair. That's the guy I think of, okay? His father passed away when he was young. And so what that means is his father only knew him as a guy that looks kind of like my age. That was the oldest he knew him. And so if his father thinks of James Hancock, that's what he thinks of. So, like, who is the James Hancock? Right? Which one is it? All right, those kinds of questions. Right now, you're complicated. Now I'll give you, this is where this is going to go to really become the answer to all of the questions. The answer to all of the questions is ultimately going to be found in 1 Corinthians 15. So let me show you what that looks like. No worries, I'll put it up on the screen for you. 1 Corinthians 15, I'm looking at verse 35 and following. So he's talking about the resurrection. Here are people that are kind of doubting, questioning the resurrection. They're not sure if there will actually be a resurrection. So I'm sorry, okay. Just making sure that you can hear me okay. I just got a message that I was muted, but I think I'm okay. All right, so in the resurrection, how will they come? And so he asks this question, 1 Corinthians 15:35. But some man will say, how are the dead raised up? And with what body do they come? Right. That's essentially the question we're asking, isn't it? We're essentially asking that question. So if there's going to be a resurrection, are they the old guy? Are they the young guy? Do they have scars? If they cut off their hand, do they still not have a hand? Like, how does this all work? Explain some of the mechanics to me. If they have a hair, you know, I like my hair short. So does that mean in heaven I'll have a short haircut? Sometimes I let my hair get longer. So if, you know, sometimes I do a different style. And during my life, I've had different styles. So which hairstyle will I, you know, these kind of, like mechanics. Give me some mechanics questions. Okay? Here's the answer to all of those questions. Paul will answer them all in 2 words. It's incredible. Verse 36, thou fool. That's his answer. Paul's answer to all of the mechanics questions is, thou fool. And I mean, it's not because he's just that, because he's going to explain more. So watch how watch how the rest of this flows. That which thou sowest is not quickened. Quickened means made alive. What you sow is not made alive unless it dies. What you sow, not the body that will be, but bear grain. Maybe, let's say, like, for example, wheat or some other grain. But God gives it a body as it pleases him to every seed his own body. All right, that's maybe some verbiage that, I can't say verbiage, some language maybe it's hard for us to immediately grasp. So I'm going to say it to you as kind of a bit of an illustration. So I have on my, let's say I have in my hands a bunch of seeds. I have here a wheat seed, I have a barley seed, I have an oak tree, you know, I have cilantro and mango or something. I have all of these different seeds, okay? So look at the seeds. They're quite different, right? The seed for an oak tree, hard, round, mango, long and thin, and, you know, if I'm gonna do the wheat, it's tiny, and like you can go all the way down like sesame. Tiny, tiny little seeds, okay? So you have all these different seeds. So question, can you figure out what the plant will look like based on looking at the seed? right? Can I look at a mango seed and be like, okay, white with this kind of texture to it, and it's long and thin. Therefore, I'll plant that. And the plant that comes out is going to be this massive tree. It's going to be shaped like a mango seed. It's going to be white with those kind of ruffled bump edges, and it's going to be like conical like that. The tree has to look like the mango seed. And since an oak tree is hard and round and brown, when it comes out of the ground, the tree will look like a massive acorn, this huge brown round thing. Well, I mean, we all know this is absurd. We know that the plants come out looking quite different than the seed. Okay. And different on lots of levels. The plant is so much bigger, so much richer, so much more complex, so much more robust, right? The seed, hard, round thing, but the tree is this complex, massive organism. Right? So you can't look at seeds and guess off of those what the plant will look like. That's Paul's illustration. And if I'm going back in here, the argument goes, as seed is different than the plant, your present body is different from your glorified body. Or another way of saying it is, if you're looking at your physical body and you're thinking, okay, so dahil dyan, ganun lang ako. That's the way I am. God says, oh my goodness, you have no idea. You have no idea. Eye has not seen, nor has ear heard the wonderful things that God has planned for people. And so to look at the world around you, or to look at your own body, and to assume that's your eternity, oh my goodness, wow. No surprise that he's going to start leading the section with "thou fool." You know, right? I mean, he's going to start off and say, "Are you? No. Oh no. Really? Really? You are going to judge and you are going to extrapolate eternity based off of now." Oh man, right? Definitely facepalm emoji, right? No way that you're going to extrapolate eternity based off of the present. And so his distinction that comes down here is celestial bodies, terrestrial bodies. There's a glory of the terrestrial, in other words, my present body, but there's a glory of the celestial, the eternity, right? And stars and the moon and the sun, they're all different. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It's sown in corruption. It's raised in incorruption. It's sown in dishonor. It's raised in glory. It's sown in weakness. It's raised in power. It's sown in natural body. It's raised in spiritual body. So, I mean, to make a direct this equals that comparison on physical bodies is just completely missing the point. Because the glory of eternity is going to be almost like a completely unrecognizable reality. So somehow, I don't know how to put those together. Somehow I get the impression that we'll still know who we are. I don't think we're going to get up to heaven and have no idea. How that works, though, I just have no idea. Yeah, right. Good. Great. Some good questions in here. Someone asked, do we have the same personality when we are in heaven? You know, let's say something like a person, you know a guy, and he's unsaved, and he's angry, and he's bitter, and he's hard to be with. Then he gets saved, and he changes. I've known people like this. He changes. He's completely different, but he's still the same guy. I think maybe something like that might be the direction to go. In other words, your entire existence on planet Earth, it's like your entire existence on planet Earth has been a grumpy, painful, annoying existence. And you're going to get to heaven, and it's still you, and we're probably going to tell it's you, but it's just going to be like all of the chains have been lifted off, right? So your grumpy, frustrated, annoyed existence gives way to a rich existence of praising and honoring God. Will you be the same personality? I mean, yes-ish, but no, not in the big picture of things, right? Because God is going to transform you. Okay, I think I hope I more or less answered the questions that you were asking there, and they were great questions, which is going to take us back here to page, whatever that is, 80 in the syllabus. And just where I'm ending out here is that it's very important for me to, very important for me, for you to understand that what we're talking about here, we will have a physical body, right? So don't think eternity is like some kind of, floaty, ghosty thing, but there's a physical body. God will raise your physical body and then glorify. So what that looks like, the glory that God will give. All right, there's more I would love to talk about there, but I'm not going to because we're down to 1 hour and I need to finish out the rest of anthropology. So let's go back and let's jump back to page 73. So on 73, what I'm talking about are components of humanity. I go here not because I particularly enjoy going here, but because it's a thing that needs to be talked about. So the reason is, this gets into this endless and incredibly pointless discussion about trichotomy and dichotomy. I just started off my discussion on page 73. One of the less helpful discussions in theology is the constituent parts of humanity. Because people get into they get all kind of worked up about whether mankind has 2 parts or 3 parts. Let me explain. One of the ideas or one of the visions understanding humanity would look more like this, that we recognize there are basically 2 fundamental components to us, physical, so I will write that as body, and immaterial, so like a spiritual or non-physical component, okay? And so under immaterial or non-physical, we would put language like body and soul, those kinds of things. Fine. So a physical and an immaterial, or a physical and a non-physical. Okay, this is, if you've ever heard the term dichotomy, that's what we're talking about. Okay, so dichotomy would be basically there are 2 components. Okay? If you've ever heard the term trichotomy, trichotomy is going to be parallel to what I just did there. Actually, no, I can't. Never mind. Trichotomy is going to be parallel to what I just did there. Okay, and what you're going to end up with though is you're going to have body, but then you're going to subdivide the immaterial side of things. And so you're going to talk about spirit and soul. And the result of that, when you get all done with it, is that dichotomy, di just is another word for 2, or a prefix for 2. Dichotomy assumes 1, 2 parts of who we are, where trichotomy, I mean, you can see right there, triangle and everything else. Trichotomy assumes 1, 2, 3. That's it. Okay, so that's the difference between trichotomy and dichotomy. And so the question is, when we refer to the immaterial part of us, the non-physical part of us, are we talking about something that includes both spirit and soul, or are we just talking about an immaterial part that kind of indistinguishably so? All right, in order to explain some of what people are saying or thinking when they talk about this, is let's look at 2 passages that are in your notes. And I'll skip here, I'm going to page 74. 2 passages that talk about this. Hebrews 4:12 says that the word of God is like a sword, and it splits even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit, joints and marrow, soul and spirit. And the other passage that works like this a little bit is 1 Thessalonians 5:23, where Paul prays that your whole spirit and soul and body be kept blameless. Okay. So if you're putting those 2 passages together, back to my diagram, 1 Thessalonians 5:23, your whole spirit, soul, and body, you can see why somebody is thinking here, okay, your whole spirit and soul and body, 3. Or another way of saying it is, if you're going the trichotomy route, when Hebrews 4:12 says the dividing asunder of joints and marrow and spirit and soul, then you can get right here, okay, these things obviously must be different. You can't say they're the same. They must be different. So that's kind of the rationale, that's the logic for this. And that's fine, it's fine logic. I'm okay with it. But now let's understand a little bit what we talk about when we are talking about dichotomy at the bottom of page 74. The concept in dichotomy is to say that actually soul and spirit are used interchangeably, or they're 2 different words for the same thing. Okay, using my diagram over here, the concept of it goes body and immaterial, but on the physical part of you and then the non-physical part of you. I mean, I think believers universally are at least going to recognize something like that. And even unbelievers do. It's funny, they'll deny the spirit world, they'll deny that there's a God or that there's angels or so forth. But then their brother dies and they'll stand up in a funeral and they'll say, well, he's gone to a better place. Even though his body's right there. So, I mean, the body of the brother is in a box, but they still talk about the brother as though he's something else. Well, that tells me that even unbelievers think that there is a something here, that we are more than just bodies. Okay. And that should be obvious enough. I mean, actually, it has there's a very long philosophical tradition. Humans have recognized this for thousands of years, that we are more than bodies. It's only in the era of secular materialism that we would actually reduce human beings to being nothing but bodies, just physical machines. That's absurd, I think. So anyway, in any case, we're agreed on that. The dichotomist, however, is going to say, when you say immaterial, by immaterial, that means spirit / soul. In other words, these are two different words of referring to the same thing. Okay? So ways of referring to the same thing. So if you think about languages work this way a lot. Tell me exactly what is the difference between man, here, I'll change my word. Mankind. Not only did I change my word, I changed my color. Mankind and humanity and people and Homo sapiens. I can put a couple more down, right? And if I say that, you realize right away, I said the same thing using 3 different words. So the existence of separate words does not mean separate realities. In other words, none of us are going to look here and say, mankind is a different creature from humanity, and that's a different creature from people. Right? These are just different words for referring to the same thing. So the argument for dichotomy goes, God used the words spirit and soul, and he uses them interchangeably. He uses them as 2 different words to refer to the same thing. If you come back here, you can see some places like this. Actually, I don't even think I'm going to read this, except maybe I'll just show you a couple of examples here. For instance, what goes to heaven when we die, the spirit or the soul? And the answer is Hebrews 12:23 talks about the spirits of righteous people in heaven. Revelation refers to them as souls. Jesus said he was troubled in his soul and in his spirit, if you're looking at the 2 different gospels. You even have places where in one passage that's parallel to another one, we'll use soul, the other will use spirit. You have places where when people die, when they die, what goes away? And the answer is they give up their souls. But in other places, they give up their spirits. Either soul or spirit can be used as the other part, like you have body and soul, or body and spirit. Either way can be used that way. And finally, there is no set of distinguishing characteristics for soul and spirit, meaning you can find that the soul sins or the spirit sins. The soul thinks, the soul feels, the soul acts, the spirit feels, thinks, acts. The soul or the spirit can pray or worship. Any of them can do any of these things. Which the fundamental, or where this goes then, we went through this together with my class, the local BJMBC class here recently. And the biggest question I received in this section, people asking me, so what exactly is the difference between the soul and the spirit? And I agree. If you're a trichotomist and you do body, soul, spirit, the 3 parts, the biggest question you struggle to answer is, what exactly is the soul? What is the spirit? How are they different? Because Scripture doesn't really give us answers on what these are and how they're different. Okay. So one problem or one concern I have with trichotomy, if you're going to dichotomy, trichotomy, I actually don't really super care which way you want to go. In fact, my suggestion would be you should not be like, I'm a flag-waving trichotomist, or I wave the dichotomist flag. This is really not one of those types of issues. Right? And so, like on the tests, I told my students, I asked them, what do you believe and why? And I told them, I don't care which one you put down, as long as you have a good reason. See, so I'm really okay with that. I'm not okay with that on the deity of Christ, right? I'm not okay with that on salvation by faith, through grace and faith alone, right? You have to have the right view. There's a right view. On trichotomy, dichotomy, I don't know. I don't care. It's really not that big a deal. Basta, as long as you recognize this towards the bottom of page 75. a concern or a thing that can be worrisome to me about trichotomy. I tilt a little bit more towards dichotomy. Concern for me about trichotomy is that because we don't know what, and we can't say what is the difference between soul and spirit, people start making it up. That's fact. They just start making it up. And that's not good. So if you ever hear things like this, people say, well, you need to try to live more in your spirit than in your body. Or if you emphasize the body, then that's going to be bad. But if you can emphasize your spirit, that's the way to sanctification. Okay? I'm going, what? What does that mean? Like, does that mean stop eating? I mean, what is it? I have to take care of my body. I don't have any choice. I can't live outside of my body, right? The only way I know to live currently anyway is in my body. What are you even talking about? Try to emphasize your spirit more than your body. Huh? Okay. Those kinds of things concern me. A second thing, because the mind is part of the soul, trichotomy can start to lead to this unhealthy, mystical approach to God. So what you get now, and again, I've had people say this to me. I've had people say to me things like, well, our relationship with God is through our spirit, not our soul, not our mind. And so since it's through our spirit, not our mind, then you have a relationship with God just kind of, one person used this with me as an argument for translation. And they said, well, your translation, the translation used of the Bible, it's not as much critical that you understand it with your mind because your relationship is with God through your spirit anyway. What? Okay, so if you hand me a French Bible, I can pore over the words all day, but that means nothing to me. I will never get a blessing from a French Bible, right? Because I don't speak French. All right, so you have to understand with your mind in order to have a relationship with God. You do. I mean, you just do. You have to you can't witness to rocks. There's a reason. They don't have brains. Okay? You witness to people because they have brains. You have to speak the same language as them to witness to them. Mind, okay? So trichotomy, I'm not saying all trichotomy goes here, but it is a concern if you go a direction that you kind of turn it into a mystical sort of approach to God. Then that can get weird. And then my last thing, and I probably should adjust my notes to say this, but because there is not much biblical information about mind or soul and spirit, then this becomes very fertile ground for theological speculation. And just my experience with trichotomy, if people are like flag-waving trichotomists, if they're really big into trichotomy, then they will start making things up. And so I've had people tell me before something like, when we were justified, then that meant that we were declared righteous in our spirits. When we are sanctified, we are being made righteous in our souls. And when we were glorified, we will be made righteous in our bodies. So you line up spirit, soul, body with justification, sanctification, glorification. There is no passage to support that. Don't do that. Bad idea. Other people I've heard do the trichotomy thing with the Trinity. So what is the Trinity like? Well, Father, Son, and Spirit, but they're all one. So me too. Body, soul, spirit, but I'm all one. I'm one person. Okay? Don't do that. You are nothing like the Trinity. I mean, you're exactly nothing like the Trinity. Right? So you don't want to look at your body, soul, and spirit and say that's parallel to the Trinity. It's not. You are exactly nothing like the Trinity. For it to truly be like the Trinity, it would have to be like my body sent my soul or communes with my soul or has a conversation with my soul. Okay? My body thinks this and it sends my soul to go do this thing. Right? It's different. It's different. You don't want to make those kinds of comparisons. It's very common to say that when you're an unbeliever, then you have a body and a soul but no spirit. Then when you get saved, God gives you a spirit, or your spirit comes to life. Okay? You can't support that biblically. Those are all wrong ideas. Okay? So I'm okay if you want to be a trichotomist and you want to say there is a body, soul, and spirit are different, I guess. Just don't start making things up. Basically, to be honest with the biblical information, if you are a trichotomist, then you have to say, I believe there's a body, a soul, and a spirit, but I'm not sure what the difference between soul and spirit is. I think that's what you have to say. there's not really much of a difference between soul and spirit. I'm not sure what it is. And if you do that, sure, I don't care. Go for it. No problem. Okay. But just, you don't ever, in theology, you don't ever want to start making things up. Never make things. It's a good rule of thumb for theology. Don't make things up. And there's not biblical information for telling us the difference between soul and spirit. What actually then becomes one more argument for some of this is on page 76. As far as, are we made up of 3 parts or are we made up of 2 parts? And how would we know? On page 76, I think this is more helpful to me to recognize that when Scripture describes humans and the aspects of humans, we have a lot of words to describe it. So I think it's unfair to just simplify. This seems reductionistic to me. Particularly, you say, okay, there are 3 parts of humans, 1, 2, 3. Why? Because there's a word spirit and there's a word soul. Okay, but just know and recognize that actually, if you're looking at the biblical information, there's like 11 or 12 different words you can use. So before you use the fact there's spirit, soul, therefore there have to be 3 parts of us. I mean, if you're going to be honest with it, you have to know like all of these are components that God uses. And I don't know anybody who is like a 10 parts human belief or something. There's not, I don't know. There probably is a word you could do for that. Decatomist or something like that. I don't know. But we have spirit, soul, heart, mind, will, body, flesh, conscience. These are all expressions of parts of our nature. Okay? I don't think the intention of any of this is to pretend that humans are made up of pieces as though humans are built out of Legos. In other words, if you just think, okay, what is a human? And you're like, well, okay, here, I'll give you, that's human. And then over here, this is conscience, right? And over here, this is heart, right? And then you have will. Will fits in there like this, right? And then over here, soul will be like that, okay? We're not Legos. We don't fit together like that. We're not machines, right? And it doesn't take long to figure this out if you think something like, would I be helped by analyzing my relationship with my wife like this? Okay, my relationship with my wife. Here is my relationship with my wife. Here is the intellectual component of when we talk about things. And then here is, because we have kids, so we are parents together. And then over here is the financial aspect. You know what, really? Like relationships, relationships are not Legos. They don't work like that. So maybe a better visual metaphor for all of this would be recognizing humanity and the complexity of it, or a relationship for that matter. These are like overlapping realities or overlapping ways of describing lots of different things about us. So if I say the word heart, the way that Scripture uses the word heart, it's true, kind of has more of like an emotional side of emphasis to it. And conscience tends to emphasize more our sense of right and wrong. I mean, so these words are different. They're not all the same. But they're all overlapping. And it's just to recognize humans are complicated creatures. We're not made out of Legos. We're not built up in little blocks, right? And so all of these things are overlapping. I think that's a much, much better, richer, robust vision of how to think about humanity and how we work. Does that make sense? Any feedback there? How does that strike you there? Happy to get your feedback in the chat. I know Kay, like I said, with somebody thinking, more dichotomous, trichotomous, I don't care. It's okay. Just a basic rule of thumb. Don't be weird. That's all, right? So follow biblical language. Don't be weird. Don't start making things up. Anytime you're weird in theology, anytime you start making things up, don't follow the biblical language. We're extremely complex beings. And I don't particularly think any of us are ever going to be helped in our theologizing by getting a bunch into like analyzing the components of humanity and how they fit together and trying to create my little box chart over there. I don't think that's going to help any of us understand the world or ourselves or the Bible better. It's just not, it's not going to work. We're too complicated for that. Okay, let's take a break. So I've got 11:40. Let's come back at 11:50, and then our last time will just be shorter. We'll just meet together for about 40 minutes. So Come back at 11:50, and then we'll wrap up. What we're planning to do here at the end is talk a little bit about what happens when we die. So, and you know some of this information, but we'll look at this biblically. All right, see you in 10 minutes. The struggle of having such engaged, motivated students. You guys are asking me for projects. Incredible. So, no, I don't have a plan for a third project. But our third project next week would be a test. The plan there, since even more of us are, if you're here physically, you can take the exam here. And then, oh, excuse me, let me finish my idea first. And then if you're not here physically, I will send you a PDF, and you can just take that PDF. You could print it and then write on the PDF and then scan it and send it back. It's so easy these days, you know, just take a picture with your phone. So you can write on it, physically print it, write on it, take a picture with your phone, send me the picture. We're good. Or if you're really fancy, maybe I don't care if you want to type directly in the PDF, that's fine too. So that's the way we would do that. Great. And then if you're here, oh, what I was going to say, even if you're not planning to take the class for credit, I would encourage you to consider taking the exam just for the fun of it. I've never heard of such a thing. Yeah, I mean, only a teacher would say something so absurd. No, I view the exam as not so much a painful ordeal to be suffered through, but view it as an opportunity, kind of a review. So basically, you know, you've spent these hours here. The ordeal is not the exam. The ordeal is listening to my voice for hour after hour after hour. That's the ordeal. So now, once you get to the end of that, you've already succeeded. You've already passed the ordeal. And so at that point, then the exam would just be an opportunity to kind of like get an overview umbrella. Okay, pull that stuff back. Oh, that's right. Yeah, right. And it's sort of a way to get in the helicopter, fly up above, and look over the landscape one last time before you walk away. So that would be my encouragement. I think if you do it that way, the exam can be beneficial because it can be like a review. And maybe they were just being nice, but I have had students tell me before that they took the exam and it was a blessing. I don't know. They may have just been being nice, but they said that in the process of taking the exam, it helped them remember the things that we had studied, and it was sort of like a review. And so it was kind of encouraging. Like, I remember having this happen to me as a student. I'm taking the exam and it's like, oh, I learned more than I realized. Like I didn't know if I learned anything, and I actually learned some things here. I can write stuff down. That's so cool. So maybe. All right. Well, that was an attempt. Comment. I was talking to Ate Beulah here, and she's Burmese. And so she was telling me that in Myanmar, a lot of the kind of, there would be more, like people might think, if they're going to think trichotomy, they might think body, mind, and spirit. Spirit/soul. Did I get that right? Mind, body, spirit. And so they would end up trichotomy, but it's a different three. Which is kind of interesting. That itself tells me something a little bit like, even trying to define what is trichotomy gets complicated because there are so many different shapes and forms of trichotomy. So that itself tells me, and what's interesting here though that she was telling me was, the reason that they'll do spirit is because in Burmese, there's one word that they'll end up using for both spirit and soul. Whereas in English, we have separate words, spirit, soul, and even kaitabalo, kaluluwa, spirit. So we have separate words, therefore we assume that they're separate things because we have separate words for them. And to me, that's just a really interesting insight to the reality that yes, language does affect the way we do theology. Or another important way of saying it, the translations we use, the Bible translations we use, have a very significant effect on how we do theology. If they chose to translate a word a certain way, it sort of sets our minds off in that direction. And then one other comment here was, as far as the trichotomy thing, little discussion we had here. Ephesians 2 sometimes comes up as a passage, and people will say, from a more trichotomous standpoint, will say, well, look, you were dead in your trespasses, but God made you alive. So that means that your spirit came to life. Okay, just a comment I would like to make to clarify that, just to be very, very clear. If you look at Ephesians 2, it does not say that your spirit came to life. It said that you were dead and then you came to life. Okay, so anyway, read these passages carefully, right? It says you came to life. And what that means then is you were dead. What was dead? I mean, I felt fine. I had a pulse. No, you were dead. All of you was dead. That means your mind was dead, meaning you were cut off from God. You were thinking wrong. Your heart was dead. You didn't love God. You loved the wrong things. Your conscience was dead. You lied to yourself and told yourself that the right was wrong and the wrong was right. Even your body was dead and dying because of the results of sin. I mean, you were dead. So again, a problem or a concern I have about dichotomy, trichotomy at times, we tend to like segment, and we're like, this part of us is the problem, or that part of us was dead, or this part of us is broken. The rest is okay. And the biblical framework is we are not okay. All of us is bad. All of us was broken. Jesus saves all of us. All of us is being sanctified. All of us will be glorified. So you don't start cutting and slicing the human nature and being like, that's the bad part, the rest is good. There is no like bad part, the rest is good. It's all bad. All of it's bad. All of it's justified. All of it's being sanctified. All of it will be glorified. It all comes together. See, but it gets weird once we start cutting and slicing. That part was the broken part. The rest was okay. No, I have no okay part. Me is bad, but me is being redeemed. Me will be glorified. All right. Amen. Excellent. That's why we have these. We enjoy these times together. Oh, great, wonderful. Okay, I'm going to do something on page 76. I want to wrap up this section, and then I have a question. And it's a question I got from a student here, but it's going to be good. It'll be a good discussion for us to have. Page 76. Where do our souls come from? If you want to read that bottom part, where did the souls come from, and just read it just to see what I'm saying there, great. I'm going to spend even less time on that than I did on the trichotomy, dichotomy thing. Because the simple answer, if you want, you could save yourself time here. Where do our souls come from? You could write in there, we don't know. There are these different theories, and I gave you 3 of them here. God created our souls, or our souls came from basically kind of like from our parents, the way our bodies come from our parents. I mean, I'm not actually really sure what that means. Of these 3 theories, pre-existence of the soul is no good. Okay, Mormons believe this in some form, I suppose. Buddhism teaches this, Hinduism teaches this, because you have the idea that you come back around again. So the idea of this is that you already existed before you were conceived. And then when you're conceived, then like God or the world spirit or something places that spirit into you, okay? And that's not a biblical idea. I did not exist any earlier than, I have to think about that for a second, than the very end of 1981, okay? I did not exist any earlier than that. Before that time, there was no me whatsoever at all, okay? So that's important to recognize. But as far as whether like your soul comes from your parents or your soul is just created by God at that moment, I don't know. And Scripture doesn't really give us any information there. And that's all I'll say, because that's all I should say. Scripture just doesn't say anything. Okay, page 77 at the bottom, where do our souls go? This does matter. So where do we exist after death but before our resurrection? And the answer is our bodies will be resurrected, but while we're waiting, our souls are in the presence of God. So our soul, spirit, however you want to do that. If you're trichotomous soul and spirit, if you're dichotomous soul / spirit, don't care. That thing, the non-material part of you, is in the presence of God. And let me show you 2 views that are wrong here. View number 1 is soul sleep. The idea of soul sleep has come and gone in the history of the church. But the idea is, I guess if you want to call it the church, in the history of theology, the idea is that after you die, your existence is kind of like what? Like asleep, like not conscious. So you die and there is no like conscious you. Your soul is just sort of frozen out there somehow, like you're asleep or something. And then after a couple of 1,000 years or whatever, when the resurrection happens, then God raises your body and then your soul comes back awake again. Usually, this is the most relevant part of it. Usually, what accompanies this notion is an idea that if you were a wicked person, then God will just never wake you up. So, like, if you talk to Jehovah's Witnesses and you really ask them and you press and you find out what's going on here, they would like to avoid the concept of hell. So would I, actually. The concept of hell is very disturbing. So a Jehovah's Witness will avoid the concept of hell. The way they avoid it is when you die, your soul is kind of like asleep, not conscious. Then a couple of 1,000 years go by or something. If you were a good guy, God wakes your soul up. But if you're a bad guy, there is no more you. And so your choices are between heaven or nothing. It's between heaven or nothing. But there's not a hell of conscious torment. Except for, I'm not super up on this point of Jehovah's Witness doctrine. I think there might be a hell for the devil and his angels, but not for the humans. The humans aren't there, just the devil and his angels. I think that's the way that works. Okay, so soul sleep then is just that you don't exist or you're kind of not conscious after you die. There's reasons that they say that. There's passages they can go to. So on page 77, the Bible does often speak of death as sleep. Jesus told them we will go to awaken Lazarus from sleep. Paul refers to believers who have died as people who are asleep. So there are passages that talk like that. The problem with this is that we have very clear passages that tell us specifically a person dies and they're right in the presence of God right away. So let me just pause here for a second and explain why Scripture is talking about sleep, or why it refers to death as sleep. We're tempted to think that was just like Bibleese or something. Well, in the Bible, they just always refer to death as sleep. I don't think so. I can't say for sure because I wasn't alive at the time. But I don't think this was a common way to refer to death. I think this was a Jesus thing. I think Jesus referred to death as sleep. Okay? And actually, there's some Old Testament precedent for it. But I think this is a Bible thing, not just a linguistic thing. It's not just the way they talked in Greek. And why would the Bible choose to refer to death as sleep? What do you think? I think let's see what you think. Like, why would the Bible choose to use sleep as a metaphor for death? Take a guess. See it in the chat or anyone here. That's it. Good. The concept of death as sleep, or the picture of death as sleep, is because it's a temporary condition. Okay, so we all get that when I sleep, it's just, okay, I'm just going to do this for a little while, then I'll be back. None of us, well, I don't know, I can't say that, but I mean, it's possible, I suppose. But most of us, we just go to sleep and we don't really stress about waking up. It's possible somebody could go to sleep at night and be panicking. We're going to lose consciousness. Ah! And if you do that, eventually you are going to lose consciousness. Don't do that, right? That's a problem. I don't think many of us stress out about it because we just go to sleep and then we wake up, and that happens every day. We're kind of just used to the whole thing. We're used to the drill. But I think the underlying concept of referring to death as sleep is that experience you have, that's the way death is going to work. So you will fall asleep and you'll be back. Okay, it's a temporary condition. And actually, when you do that, then you realize, I argue, that God has built sleep into life itself as a practice run for death. I think I have a daily reminder every day. I get reminded I will die. And so if you look at a person who's sleeping, I mean, you'll see a person sleeping, right? This kind of is right. And they're completely not conscious. They're gone. Okay. I think it's a practice run. I think you're getting ready for what it would be like to die, because you will die. And every day you get a reminder that you will die. Okay, that. But at the core of it then, the concept of using sleep as a picture for death is just to say, this is not permanent, people. This is temporary. And how will the people wake up? If my son is asleep, I go in there, Jeremy, wake up, and I wake him up, okay? The language that you find used across Scripture is, God will wake up the people who are asleep. The voice of God is so powerful that he wakes them all up out of this temporary condition. The terror of death is that we look at it and we feel like it's so permanent. It's so inescapable. It's so absolute. That person is dead. It's over. It's done. You can't. It's indelible. You can't erase it. Wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Death is a temporary condition. That's the biblical language. I get why we feel like it's permanent. It's not. It's a temporary condition. Right? And that's a biblical worldview way of processing it. All right, so that's kind of talking about soul sleep, why Scripture talks about sleep. But let me get the second wrong view, and that's purgatory. And the concept of purgatory goes that if you're in a state of grace at your death, meaning you're in a relationship with the Roman Catholic Church, then you still have these venial sins that need to be cleansed. I don't want to turn this into a class on Roman Catholic theology, but just so you kind of, I guess, get the darkness, so that you understand the darkness that is Roman Catholic theology. The notion here goes, if we tell people that their sins are forgiven, they're going to heaven, they're justified, they're cleansed, then the logic goes, they'll just go out and start doing bad stuff. And so what we do is we have a distinction between the really, really bad sins and the understandable sins. Mortal sins, those can send you to hell. Those are the really rough ones, adultery, murder, and so forth like that. Like, those ones are bad news, okay? But then venial sins, well, everybody has those. And so the concept here goes, if you're in a state of grace, meaning you've been able to resolve any mortal sins, and you've been able to be in fellowship with the Roman Catholic Church, from which all grace comes, then if that has worked out, you still have these venial sins to deal with. If you can confess those to a priest before you die, all the better. Get those wiped out too. But you're still going to have something to deal with. And so what happens is you have purgatory, and purgatory is a period of time where you still suffer for the venial sins to be cleansed out. And so the venial sins have to be burned away. And you're going to suffer during that time. And the more of those things you had, or the more bad stuff you did, the longer you're going to suffer in purgatory. Transparently so. I'm sure not every Catholic would agree with what I'm about to say, but at least some have been honest enough to say this. Transparently so, the theological motivation for having a purgatory is not because Scripture supports it. It doesn't. But because they feel like if people don't have some kind of threat for their sin, then they'll just go out and sin a bunch. And so we have a concept of purgatory to scare them into good behavior. We have a purgatory because even after they're in a state of grace, they're already in communion with the Roman Catholic Church, so therefore technically they're on their way to heaven. Even though they're on their way to heaven, we still need to control their behavior so they won't go around sleeping with their neighbors and getting drunk. And so in order to manage that, we maintain purgatory. That'll keep them under control. Okay. And I mean, the concept of it goes, I suppose, pardon this, maybe you could call it a good motivation, because none of us want people to run around sleeping with their neighbors and getting drunk. I mean, I don't even want to live in a society where where that constantly happens. So none of us want that. So maybe the motivation seems ostensibly to be a good one. We're trying to bring about moral behavior. The problem is, it's not your job to create theology in order to control human behavior. Or another way of saying this, God is better at controlling human behavior than you are. Stop being creative. Don't make up theology in order to control human behavior. Give people truth. Give them truth. The best possible answer to keep people living, I'll use biblical language, soberly, righteously, and godly in this present world, the best possible way to keep people from doing wicked behaviors is the gospel, right? The truth. And so don't make up a concept of purgatory that's not in the Bible in order to get them to do the right thing. Just tell them the truth anyway. Just tell them the truth already. And the truth is Jesus died for your sins. And so every sin you do is a rebellion against the one who died for your sins. That has more binding power than the threat of purgatory. Okay. So anyway, I'd like to go further down that track, but I can't. We'll keep on moving. Both views, both the idea of soul sleep, the idea that when you die, your soul is just sort of frozen out there, and the idea of purgatory have simple biblical answers. And the simple biblical answers are right here on page 78, right after that. Number one passage in Luke 23:43, the thief on the cross. Jesus turns to the thief who is dying on the cross, and he says, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Okay, what that means is they both die. Okay, boom, they die. The thief does not go into a soul sleep state for a couple of thousand years while he's waiting for Jesus to wake him up again. Not true. Soul sleep is not true. Jesus said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." I mean, so they're literally dying here together, and Jesus says, "Amaya, this afternoon we will be together in the presence of God. Me, you, together. I'm dying, you're dying. We will be there in a couple of hours. See you there." I mean, that's literally the way he's talking. So the concept that then the soul goes into a sleep state, not true. Same with the purgatory concept. You can't say that on the basis of purgatory, that guy should go into a purgatory state and he should suffer for, I don't know, at least a good couple of thousand years or something. Okay. But he didn't. Jesus says, "I will see you later today." There is no purgatory in between. Derecho. It's right straight to heaven, right? Okay, so very, very clear. And you need to just have that passage kind of there for yourself if either of these concepts comes up. Or here's another one like this, 2 Corinthians 5:8 and Philippians 1:23 both use similar language. To be absent from the body is to be at home with the Lord, or to depart, to die is to be with Christ. So the notion goes, if you're dead and you're a believer, if you're dead and you're a believer, you're with Christ. And it's just right off. Okay, so there's no intermediate in there, as in you die, then you go to purgatory, and then eventually you get to be with Christ. There's no intermediate, as if you die and you sleep for a couple of thousand years, and then finally you're with Christ. You're dead, you're with Christ. You're not dead, you're here, but as soon as you die, you're with Christ. Okay, it's just straight. And then there are a couple of other passages who talk about believers who have died that are present in heaven right now. Hebrews 12, the souls of those who have died, just men made perfect in the presence of God. Revelation 6, 7, 20, you see those who were beheaded, now they're with God right away. In all of these cases, they're right there. Okay, great. So those are the passages you want to have. You could use Luke 16. I was a little bit disappointed. Wow, that sounds so negative. I had my Bible doctrines class, and so I asked them some questions, and a lot of them, as in like 80% of them, answered using Luke 16 as the answer to purgatory or soul sleep. And I suppose it's okay. Luke 16, I'm sorry, that's the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. And so Lazarus is looking across, and the rich man is in hell, that kind of thing. The thing there is, it's really easy to dismiss that passage because somebody just goes, come on, that's a parable. See? So it's not the most persuasive proof. And I actually agree on some level. In other words, I would not want to go to Luke 16, Lazarus and the rich man, as a way of proving, for instance, that there is a communication between heaven and hell. I don't know that that's the point of it. I think the point of it is more a parable than giving you like a cosmology of how heaven and hell work. So you're doing much better if you'll stick with the passages above that. If you'll stick with these passages like Jesus to the thief on the cross, 2 Corinthians 5:8, to depart be with Christ, Philippians 1, those are much clearer. You can't question them passages. messages. Those are explicit, very, very clear. Okay. Yeah, this is good. There's a comment here in the chat, and it's from someone, a class member that was formerly very, very Catholic. And just observing here that one of the other motivations, this is sick, one of the other motivations for purgatory is that then the church can sell indulgences. And so, I mean, there's a financial component of this. I've seen this. I've seen indulgences sold on the streets of Manila, down, what is it? It just went out of my head, where the Black Nazarene is. If you go down to the Quiapo Church, if you go to the Quiapo Church, I've seen it down there. It's horrible. It's really just awful. I hate it. It's wrong. What's that? The gospel is not for sale. Forgiveness is not for sale. But sick humans will find a way to manipulate other humans and make money out of it. It's wrong. I hate it. It's wrong. You can be like, well, okay, whatever, they have their view or something. But if you go, and I have, if you go like, you watch at Quiapo Church, and you watch people's desperation, watching people crawl on their knees from the back of the auditorium to the front of the auditorium. You watch people sitting there just on their phones, distracted or whatever, waiting, and then the priest says, okay, and they can all come forward, and they all rush in there as quickly as they can to try to get the bread and take part in the Mass, and it makes me cry. Because you've got people here that they're theologically like sheep. They're theologically like sheep without a shepherd. It's worse, they're like sheep going to the slaughter. They don't understand. They're desperate, and it's awful. It's just wrong. So this is sick humans twisting the gospel to make money. Wow.
So is it okay to use like recipes?
Sure, why not? So using language like, she was asking, what about using language like rest in peace or something like that? You say these things, these are more like cultural expressions or something. So, I mean, here's maybe a way to say it. There's no question at all that in the presence of God is rest. So Hebrews 4 uses that language. So to be with God is to be at rest. You rest from your labors. So it's biblical language, that'll work. No question that heaven is peace. So we can do that. Rest in peace, that'll work for me. I try to be very careful theologically. This is hard, but if you have a person who's an unbeliever, then you don't want to say, well, they're in a better place. They aren't. Now, I don't say that bluntly. I'm going to say to, a person who had a lost loved one or something that passes away or something like that, I'm going to be sympathetic. I'm going to say things like, our hearts are with you, our thoughts are with you, we're praying for you. But I don't want to say things that aren't true. Well, he's in a better place. I don't know if he is. Okay? So be realistic with this. Even somebody posts on Facebook and says, my grandfather just passed away. You know nothing about the grandfather. I say this partially because of even my own loved ones that have passed away. And so my grandfather that just passed away was a believer. But in other cases, I've had relatives that were not. So this person passed away. Okay, I don't think you want to just immediately say, well, he's in a better place. You don't know him. Maybe he isn't. Okay. So I try to be careful and very accurate with my words. I want to say something like, our prayers are with you, our hearts are with you. The living, I can communicate with the living, but I don't know. I pray and I hope. This person who passed away, this relative of mine, I pray and hope that maybe they heard the gospel and they didn't explicitly reject it. They didn't explicitly accept it. So I pray and hope that maybe somewhere in there they did accept the gospel, but I don't know. So I can't say they are in a better place. I don't know. Yeah, hard stuff. All right, let's finish out today. I'll do two things. One, just so you know, plan for next week. Same thing. Online, present, you want to come here? Amen. because I like seeing faces. But I can see your face here too. So, however, if you want to do it online, please, great. If you want to come here, bless you. However you want to do it, you do what you need to do. You do what you need to do. So that's the plan for next week. And then we will meet next week for the first maybe 2 hours, 2.5 hours, something like that. Basically the first half, 2 hours to 2.5 hours. And when we finish that section, then we'll stop and we'll have an exam. If you want to join us to take the exam, you could take the exam and never send it to me. That's fine. Or you could just look it over but I think the process of your actually writing the exam will be a good review. It's up to you, okay? And then if you're interested in taking the exam for credit, then you'll just print it out, write it, and then take a picture of it and send it to me. If you'll do me a favor, please, once you receive the PDF or the paper copy or whatever, please, when you're done, destroy it. Just because sometimes I do use questions again. So I don't want that to be for a future generation of students, then they know my questions. So if you will do me a favor and help me, just destroy the file, delete the email, throw away the paper, that kind of thing after you're done with it. That would be a blessing to me if you can. Okay, Ma'am Joyce, I had a question that I wanted to discuss here, and I don't know that I have time to discuss your question as well. So what I'll do, I'm going to give you a quick answer, and then after we're done here, we close out the class, I'm happy to discuss further. Her question, are there 2 different hells, like a Hades or a Sheol, and that kind of thing? And so the simple answer is yes and no. There is a Hades that is different from the lake of fire. So Hades would be, the concept would be, okay, I'll use a metaphor. Sometimes if they pick up a criminal here in Quezon City or something, then they'll take the prisoner to the local jail, which is like here in Quezon City, and they'll keep them in Quezon City for a little while until the case goes to the courts, and the courts gets them a sentence, and the courts say, okay, they'll be in prison for 3 years. At that point, they're moved to the permanent jail, okay? So there's like a temporary holding place while they're figuring out what to do. And then once they figure out what to do, they take them to the permanent place. Okay, that is maybe the picture here for you to use for Hades versus the lake of fire. So a person dies in 2020, they will be in Hades, which is going to be a place of torment, conscious torment. They'll be there, but then eventually, when everything is done, the final judgment, they're cast into the lake of fire permanently. Now, I said yes and no. There's a complex kind of, another thing you might hear, which is Sheol, having like a good side and a bad side. There's like Sheol, here's all of Sheol, and then it's split, and there's like happy Sheol and sad Sheol. So and Sheol, by the way, is an Old Testament term. It's an old Hebrew word. So the concept, this theory went that if you were a righteous person, you would go to the happy side. If you were a wicked person, you would go to the bad side. And then when Jesus came and he died, everyone came out of Sheol. The bad people went to Hades, the good people went into the presence of God, meaning that the Moseses and the Elijahs and the so forth in the Old Testament were not yet in the presence of God. They were in Sheol, waiting until Jesus came, and then they could, okay, I don't believe that, and that theory is pretty much out of date now, but I hear it every once in a while. I wish it would go away. It's not a good view. So there's different reasons that it's not a good view, but no, I don't believe that. Sheol in the Old Testament is actually just means grave. So that explains a lot of those passages. The word just means grave. But the word is a little more complicated than that too. In any case, what happened to David when he died? Same thing that will happen to me when I die. What happened to David when he died? He went into the presence of God. What will happen to me when I die? I will go into the presence of God. So that. Oh, and I have to do this too. Just make this very clear. Understanding humanity and understanding our bodies, our souls, our spirits. I'm going to do this on a timeline. Here's where I'm born. Here's where I'm born. Over here is where I die. Okay? This is going to represent my soul, spirit. So the immaterial part of me. This will represent my body. Okay, so here's my body. Here's my spirit, my soul. I was born. Okay, before that moment, neither one existed. There was none. So it's not like there was a spirit and it kind of like floated down from heaven and then joined my body. All of me began in 1981. Okay, so that. All right, so body and spirit / soul. Okay, here's before there is me, there is no me, and then body, spirit, soul, boom, they all exist together. Okay, now they exist. Now I walk through life, and I live my life, and so here right now I'm teaching the class. That's that point, and then my life. And I don't know how much further that line goes. So here we are, and then at that point I die. Okay, my body stays on planet Earth, and it sits in a grave and it returns to dirt. My spirit and my soul go into the presence of God. Okay, you got that? So body is still on earth, spirit, soul are in the presence of God. Continue forward. Eternity now, Jesus returns, rapture. At that moment, my body comes back to life and it joins my spirit. Okay, and so now my body, my spirit, and soul are back together again. Yay! And for all eternity, body, soul, and spirit are in the presence of God. Okay, you follow that? So here's spirit, soul, here's body, they don't exist. Okay, in 1981, I come into existence at the same time, spirit, soul, body, and I exist through my life. I die, spirit, soul go into the presence of God, body stays on earth. Okay, move forward a couple of thousand years or something. Jesus returns as the rapture, body comes back to life, and it's united. Spirit, soul, body are together again. Hooray! And for all eternity in the presence of God, spirit, soul, and body. Okay? If you get that timeline, it should be clear. But not all the people in your churches get that timeline. So it might be worth teaching them. Help explain, make sure that that timeline is clear. Some of them are confused about how in eternity will I have a body, or when I die, does my spirit still exist, or where is it? Or even sometimes, you know, the whole thing about they die, but then the spirit is walking around for 40 days during the funeral. You know, you get all these, there's all these things out there. Okay? So we want to help all those things go away. Help teach people till they go away. All right, the last question I'm going to ask you. Cremation. Good thing, bad thing. Should we cremate our bodies? Is it acceptable for bodies to be cremated? Okay, define words. My grandfather just passed away a couple of months or two ago, and his body was buried. Okay, but an alternative, I know people, and when they died, the body was cremated. Ashes are put in an urn and that kind of thing. Okay, what's intriguing about this question is that it follows very much cultural lines. So you can go to places in the world where the majority culture does cremation. And in those communities, the Christians probably will too. Okay? I just saw a missionary that passed away in Japan, and she had her body cremated. Okay? So the Christian community within Japan typically does that. The argument has gone that if you look in the Bible, you always find burials, not cremations. So there's that. Another argument of this goes that when we are putting a body in the ground, we should think of it like planting a seed. I think that's a pretty good argument. If you go to 1 Corinthians 15, he actually uses that language. So you put the body in the ground with a faith that, almost like a picture of planting a seed. You put it in the dirt, you cover it over, but that's body's coming back out again, that kind of definition. But in any case, let's have a full and robust theology to recognize that it's not like it would be any easier for God to resurrect a body than to resurrect ashes, right? In other words, we've had a number in the history of, God's people, we've had lots of people, we've had a number of people who were martyred by being burnt at the stake. They had no choice in the matter, right? So they were burned, and then their ashes were taken, in some cases on purpose to dishonor them. Their ashes were swept up and thrown in the ocean. Right? Or you have other cases where, a sailor is in the middle of the ocean on a ship and he dies. And let's say he's a believer. They throw him overboard. What's going to happen to that body? It's going to be eaten, right? It's going to be eaten by fish, and then, it'll just get mixed in the water and it's gone, right? Okay, so that's what's going to happen to that body. God's not going to have any harder time resurrecting that body, right? So that's also reality, and that's that. I would like also to leave a little bit of room in here. I don't have any biblical statement somewhere that explicitly says cremation is a sin. I don't plan personally to be cremated. I don't know anybody in my family that wants to be cremated. Typically Americans will do the burial thing. But I want to leave room here to recognize that Scripture never, I can't point to a passage that says, don't cremate the bodies. And that's probably a recognition of the fact that Christianity is an international, global reality. In other words, Matthew 28, the gospel is supposed to go out to the world. And that will lead to, within some societies, it's probably not going to be practical to bury all of those bodies. So what do Christians do in those societies? A lot of times they'll try to do burials, but I think Scripture has not set up in a way that it's going to make those people feel like for instance, you won't go to heaven if your body is cremated or something. There's nothing like that. Or you sin if your body ended up being cremated. There's nothing like that. And there are societies, I think, if I understand it right, I think Singapore would be an example of this. South Korea would be an example. Japan would be an example of this. Maybe Hong Kong, I'm not sure. Where the only way you're going to be buried is if you have the money to be able to afford that plot and make it happen. And so let's say there's a believer in one of those societies and they just don't have the money. I don't think we want to leave that believer in a place where they feel like they've done something evil, if it's just coming down to something practical like that. So let's be balanced with it. I do plan to be buried. I think there's a nice picture of that. You're planting a seed. And Christians historically, more of them have buried than cremated. But there's not an explicit statement in Scripture that you're sinning or you won't go to heaven or something if you had your body cremated instead. And there's room here for other cultures and other societies that actually do it differently. There is room in that. Okay, I hope that was sufficiently controversial to end off our class. So if you're bothered by that, we can discuss here further. I'm happy to talk further by chat as we keep on going. Yeah, someone was at, well, I'm going to close the class and then I'll interact here. If someone wants to stick around, we can talk further on the chat and elsewhere. So let's pray. Let's thank the Lord for the time we've had here. Let's ask Him to help us conform our thinking about ourselves. Who am I? What is humanity? What is the image of God? What defines me as a person? What is humanity? Let's ask God to help us conform our thinking about ourselves to what He says in His Word and to think that way. So let's pray. Father, we thank you for fundamentally at the core, we thank you for Jesus Christ, the image of God. We thank you that Jesus shows us what true, good, right humanity looks like. We thank you that He came as fully man, that He lived a perfect life, born and growing and learning language, and as an adult, ministering and serving and sleeping and eating and fully human. All of the realities that we face as we live our lives. Jesus Christ did all of this, facing temptation, and yet without sin. Kaitisa. We thank you that we see in all of that Jesus Christ is our perfect example, the paradigm of good, right, perfect, even successfully lived humanity. We beg you to help us to be like Him. We beg you that we might be conformed not to the thinking of our world, but to what Jesus was, what Jesus is. Conform us to His image, that we might, by your grace, be everything that human beings are supposed to be, that we might fulfill our place, men, women, married, single, Singaporean, Filipino, American, that each one of us would live in our place, in our way, according to the image of Jesus Christ, and what that looks like and what you've called us to do. That you would help us to be faithful in all of these ways. We ask this in His name. Amen. Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week. As I said, if you want to stick around, happy to chat here about a couple of other discussions here.
Bye-bye.
I'm interested here, maybe they jumped off, but Likyayo, if you're still on here, let me just see if you're still on here. Oh, so you made a comment here, Filipinos don't actually bury, is that acceptable? And I think what you mean is that typically, at least here in Metro Manila, people are being put into concrete. Is that correct? Is that the idea you're asking? Versus actually like dirt. I think that's what you're asking. Like we typically lower the coffin in and seal it with concrete. And yeah, I mean, there's not a big difference there. I don't know that we have to have like grass or something to make it count. Yeah, I see what you mean. Still above the ground. Yeah, I don't know. Salamat. Thank you, Pop. I do think that's probably where we are getting into this, right? The New Testament is purposefully not giving us a burial code. Like, here are the rules for burial. The 6 things you have to do for a burial to count. Just because it's recognizing, like, Christians are going to exist in a lot of places around the world. Here in Manila especially, it's not practical to have these huge grassy graveyards the way they do in other parts of the world sometimes. So yeah, right. I don't think we're supposed to be bothered by that or stressed or try to go find a place where we can be buried under the ground. It's not necessary. So it's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. It's really interesting. I'm looking across here some of the other questions. When a believer dies and goes to heaven, is he in a spirit or will he have a glorified body right away? Great question. And the answer to your question is, I think I answered that. The answer to the question was, right, I die, my spirit is in the presence of God, my body is still here. So I don't have a glorified body. I just have a spirit, right? And so then it's at the resurrection that my glorified body, that's when the glorified body happens. So for this time, no, I don't have a glorified body. It's just my spirit. 1 Thessalonians 4:16. Yeah, what that means is the dead in Christ shall rise first. In other words, my grandpa died. I'm still alive. Let's say that Jesus comes back this afternoon. My grandpa will go first and then me. And the logic in the passage of it.
I'm leaving.
Oh, wow.
Okay, bye. Thank you for it.
Give me just a quick second. I'm going to say goodbye. Okay, sorry there. So, okay, and the logic of the passage, I think, is that in this church, this group, Thessalonica, they're worried that if you died before Jesus returned, maybe that means you're not going to go to heaven, right? Because think about the first generation. Jesus dies, he rises again, and then there's these believers living, and they're waiting. When will he come again? He ascended to the Father. When is he coming back? So they're waiting. And then as time goes by, they assumed like 20 years, 30 years, he'll come back. Well, 20 years goes by, 30 years go by. People get old and people start dying. And so what about those guys? Maybe they died before he came back, and that means they have no hope. So Paul's answer to them is, no, you missed it. Everybody who dies will be raised again. In fact, he says, not just that. The people who died will get there before you do. The people who died will be resurrected even before the people who are still alive. So don't think kawawa sila, talo sila, or don't think something like they don't get to be part of things because they died early. No, actually, sila ang una sayo sila. I think that's the notion of it. So that's what this means when the dead in Christ will rise first. My understanding of the passage, it's not like, the rapture happens, they all go up and we're sitting down. When do we get our turn? It's not that notion. The whole thing is in the twinkling of an eye. So how fast can you blink your eye? Really fast. And so in that moment, I'll be silly about it. The dead in Christ go up, and we have to wait an additional 0.5 twinkling of an eye. We have to wait for an additional half of a twinkling of an eye before we go up. That's kind of the concept. The dead in Christ. But they're going to go first before we. That's kind of the notion. So I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, okay, good. A question here. This is in the private chat, but let me answer it. Someone In fact, if you guys don't mind, I will copy out, it's in the private chat, but I'll copy it out and drop it into the everyone chat just so you can read the question. So the question was, who is being referred to as there's only ever been one person like him on page 79? And what I mean is that only like Jesus. I don't actually see the exact statement. Fully God, fully man. Yeah, there is. Fully God, fully man. Jesus Christ is genuinely, uniquely human. There's only ever been one person like Jesus, meaning him. He's the only one of his kind. Unique chat. Tanging anak ng Diyos. Tanging tao. We can do something like that. He's a tanging anak ng Diyos, tanging tao din. So he's uniquely human. And yeah, no, he's the only person that has ever been like that. Great. Maybe I need to reword that so it makes sense. Otherwise, it's a bit of a confusing question. All right. Anything else? Drop it in there. Happy to. I appreciated earlier the input from one of the students. I'll just say one of the students here that was communicating here about the Catholic theology. In fact, I'll copy their comment in here for your benefit. Again, this is a person that had very direct, for years, pursued righteousness through the Roman Catholic Church, and an article here that's talking about that. So maybe if that's been of benefit to you. I think before I moved to the Philippines, before I did things like seeing Quiapo Church and such like that, I probably did not have the same visceral, emotional, strong reaction to Catholicism that I do today. But just seeing people that I care about, not friends, relationships, but just people around me that they're blind and they're confused. It's a self-blindness, but it's with the help of the church. So the help of the church, the help of the Roman Catholic Church, this money-making organization. It's very dark. I'll just kind of sort of chatting here. A story from last week. A guy I met is a taxi driver, and I'm chatting with him, and he mentioned that his wife was Christian. And he said he went to a Christian church, like Baptist church, I think. And he said the pastor was really good because he said he preached the Bible, where my priest just tells stories. So I said to him, so why do you go there to the Catholic Church if he's not going to tell you the Bible? You should go to your wife's church if you're going to hear the Bible there. And the guy said, well, he said, the nice thing is I can go, I can do the mass, but when your barkada comes, your friends come, and they want to get drunk on the weekend, that's just so much fun. And so I don't want to miss out. So the nice thing about being Catholic is I can go to the mass in the morning and I can feel better about I did the God thing, but then I can still get drunk. And sabi niya, ganun mga Catholic. That was just his comment. I thought that was very blunt, more blunt than a lot of Catholics would be. And I'm not saying all Catholics are that. I know that there are very dedicated, determined Catholics who are trying to find righteousness through the church. But I thought there was something blunt about that, just exposing this is part of the Catholic Church does it to make money and have power. The people accept that because actually at the end of the day, the demands of Christianity through the Catholic Church are a lot lower. You can still do what you want to do. I think that's a little bit of the game. People are willing to accept kind of a thin layer of religion. They can still be drunkards, they can still be gay, they can still sleep with their neighbor. And as long as they go and they get the mass and they rub the foot on the statue and stuff like that, then they feel better about themselves. So it goes both ways. It's not just the church deceiving, but it's the people willingly wanting it. It goes both ways. It's not good. All right, well, I'm just going way over time and using your time, but I appreciate all of your input and interest. Anybody who wants to think about theology, I'm happy to talk about it. If you have other questions, you want to drop it into the chat, great, or otherwise, thank you. Thank you for your time. We'll look forward to seeing you all next week. I'll leave this here if you have a question, but I'll start gathering my stuff here. Just let me know if you have a question or you want to talk about something.